Okay, members. Sorry, just 1 second. Think of people coming in. Members, you'll be aware that the Chair and Deputy Chair have sent their apologies for today's meeting. Now, under these circumstances, as long as there's a quorum of 5, then the Clerk takes the Chair and just runs through an election to appoint a Chair.
Chair, I'd like to post Nicola to stand as a Chair.
Yes, but just to explain, I'll just ask for nominations. If there's a nomination, there is. I can just say, are there any other nominations? Let's shortcut at that election. Nicola, would you mind taking the Chair?
You'll never get elected that easily again. No.
Otherwise we have to do that.
Okay, thank you, members. If I could just draw attention to those who are in the public gallery that you can use your mobile devices through the Wi-Fi connection, but all devices should be muted, and password details are available on the gallery rules for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. 3G and 4G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. And can I also just remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices and mobile phones in particular? Okay, so could I invite members to declare any interests which are relevant to items on today's agenda? Can I declare that as a landlord of a property, declare an interest in respect of the landlord regs that will be coming before us?
Declare an interest as well as a landlord. I've already done it, just for the purposes of today's business.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to apologies. I've received apologies from Carol Nicullen, Colin Eastwood, Michelle Gildernew, Andy Allen and Adrian McQuillan. I'm not aware of any other apologies. All members are here.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd just like to notify the committee I will need to nip out around 11:15 to introduce an event I'm hosting. So.
Chair, can I just apologise for being late? I was taking some people to vote.
No problem. So we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is the draft minutes. Are members content with the minutes of the 16th of June as drafted on page 6 of the meeting pack?
Great.
Members are content. Okay, members will be aware that we have quite a jammed-packed agenda in front of us, so we will, time depending, suspend for 30 minutes to allow for lunch following the housing presentations. Can I also just remind members that because we have such a packed agenda that we are going to limit the presentations to 30 minutes, including questions, to ensure that the meeting finishes by 2 p.m. So we'll move to the next item, matters arising, and we will, to propose that secondary legislation be dealt with now in case that we lose our quorum. Are members content if we move to do that?
Great.
Okay. In respect of the SR and the landlord registration scheme, you will have a revised version in hard copy in front of you. I understand that there was a technical change made. It doesn't affect the policy content or outcome. And just to ask members, do they have any objections to the rule? No. Okay, so then, if I can put the following question to you, that the Committee for Communities has considered the statutory rule, the Landlord Registration Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2016, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly.
Great.
Okay, then if I can refer members to the draft letter on page 14 of your meeting packs to the Executive Office. Just to remind members that at its meeting on the 16th of June, the committee, having noted correspondence in relation to the PRONI annual report on public bodies and public appointments for 2014-15, agreed to write to the Executive Office to raise concerns about the imbalance of female representation on boards, particularly in the position of chairpersons of public bodies, and the lack of representation from minority groups such as ethnic minorities and people with disabilities. The committee agreed to ask the Executive Office what plans they have to address this imbalance, and the Clerk has drafted a letter for the committee's consideration. The letter is on page 14 of your packs, and can I just seek agreement that members are content for that letter to issue?
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll move to the first of our briefings from the Deputy Secretaries. Just to remind our Deputy Secretaries and those who are briefing that we have set aside 30 minutes. Could we ask that briefings are kept succinct, because we do have a number of questions which we want to succinctly put to you so we can get through as many as possible. And so in saying that, can I invite the following officials to the meeting? Mr Andrew Hamilton, Deputy Secretary, Ms Deborah Brown, Director of Financial Management and Governance, and Ms Gillian Morton, Temporary Director of Financial and Commercial Services. And I now invite the officials to brief the committee.
Good morning, members, and thank you for your invitation this morning to present to you the role of the Strategic Policy and Resources Group, and really to go through the financial position and budget for the department. That will be our emphasis, and that is why I have with me today my two financial experts. On my left, Deborah Brown, who is Director of the Financial Management and Governance Division, and on my left, Gillian Morton, who is responsible for financial services and financial and commercial services. So, as I said, our emphasis this morning really is to take you through the budget. The group is responsible for the whole remit of corporate services throughout for the department, which includes HR, estate services, and it also has some policy responsibilities for areas which don't fit easily within any of the other business areas. But because our emphasis this morning is on the budget, that's why I thought I'd bring my two finance directors with me. So I'm going to hand over to them now to take us through the budget, and I'll start with Deborah.
Okay, thank you. So as Andrew says, Gillian and myself are going to take you through the budget for the Department for Communities. The department is structured into 5 directorates, each of which is led by a Deputy Secretary. There is the Strategic Policy and Resources Unit, the Community Regeneration and Housing, Community Cohesion, Working Age and Social Inclusion. Following the June monitoring, the department has a budget of approximately 837 million of DEL resource and 161 million of DEL capital and 5.9 billion of AMI. DEL is the departmental expenditure limit. It is planned and controlled within the spending review process, which determines the departmental budgets. This type of expenditure is by its nature predictable and controllable. DEL resource budgets relate mainly to the running costs of the department. It includes the programme costs to provide services to the public, the staff salaries and the administration costs. There's also DEL capital, which includes expenditure on new construction, land, extensions, alterations to existing buildings, movements on loans and the purchase of fixed assets. Examples of this would be our housing projects and the stadiums. DEL budgets can also be ring-fenced, which means that they cannot be used for any other purposes, for example, the Fresh Start budget or the voluntary exit scheme. The AMI budget, the annually managed expenditure, is for expenditure which is not predictable and controllable, and this includes social security benefits and pensions, and this is demand-led by nature. So just to give you an overview of the budget structure within the Department for Communities, we have one request for resources which sets out the purpose for the department in functional terms. This is then subdivided on the budget into units of service, which group together the main spending areas for the department. So this includes a spending area for central administration, employment and welfare reform, another one for community cohesion and regeneration, one for housing, one for culture, arts and leisure, and one for child maintenance. Overall, we have 7 of these and 2 AMI and then 2 non-budget units of service. And this is important because during the monitoring rounds, there is flexibility to move within each unit of service and within the same category of spend. Movements between the units of service is allowed up to the de minimis rule, and that level is set at £1 million within the full financial year. Now moving to the individual directorates within the department. The Strategic Policy and Resources Group has a resource budget of 249 million and capital of 2.3 million. Of this budget, 130 million relates to housing benefit rates. This is the rate that is paid on behalf of the Housing Executive and Housing Association tenants. It's a notional amount and the cost is shown in the departmental accounts. This group is also responsible for a range of corporate services, including finance, which is responsible for the management of the department's budget. It's also responsible for contract and debt management, business planning, personnel, estate management, and the management of the Minister's office. It's also responsible for promoting a consistent approach to evidence-based, outcome-focused policy making across the department and policy development in areas which don't easily sit in other areas. For example, it includes local government, equality and other policy areas, social policy areas such as gambling and licensing. The Strategic Policy and Resource Group plays an enabling role by ensuring that business areas have access to timely, high-quality advice, guidance and information, and promotes a cohesive approach across the department. It also has a governance role, exercising a challenge and reporting function to ensure the effective deployment of the department's financial, human and physical resources in pursuit of the Executive's priorities. Within this business area, it includes the local government, which has a budget of 51 million. This includes the D-rating grant of 25 million, which provides district councils with 100% compensation loss of rate income due to the statutory D-rating policies for certain policies put in place by the Department of Finance. A grant of 18 million provides rate support, which supports less well-off councils in providing key services, and 5 million for the transfer of functions grants. There are other smaller grants which include the Scheme of Emergency Financial Assistance for flood relief, which reimburses district councils for expenditure in event of flooding, and an emergency planning grant which supports the civil contingencies role within local government. Moving to the Community Regeneration and Housing Group within the department. Community regeneration is there to tackle area-based deprivation and to create urban centres which help to bring divided communities together. Urban regeneration programmes aim to build sustainable communities and regenerate towns and cities across Northern Ireland. In delivering these, we aim to achieve the highest standards in sustainability. The neighbourhood renewal budget in 16-17 has 26 million, 21 million resource and 5 million capital. Neighbourhood renewal strategy targets those communities throughout Northern Ireland suffering the highest levels of deprivation. Neighbourhood renewal also includes the areas at risk. The Areas at Risk pilot programme was established back in 2006 to identify and intervene in areas at risk of slipping into a spiral of decline. Examples of work in this area include the Harryville Men's Shed, the Ballymena and Derryview Childcare Facility. Also within this business area, we have physical development with a budget in 16-17 of 24 million, made up of 5 million resource and 19 million capital. The physical development budget includes public realm and comprehensive development, and examples of this work would include the Belfast Streets Ahead, public realm in Ballyclare and Randalstown, which was completed by March of 2016, and 3 major public realm schemes in Ballymena, Larne and Portstewart are currently underway. There's also the Lagan Weir Bridge, the Strabane Bridge, the Girdwood Infrastructure Project. Within this business area, we also have the housing, which has a budget of 147 million and capital of 190 million. Housing is responsible for managing the relationship with the department's largest non-departmental public body, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. They deliver and administer a number of programmes on behalf of the Housing Executive. Of the overall housing budget, 137 million is resource and 170 million is capital. Within this resource, this includes 73 million for supporting people, and this helps people to live independently, including those who are moving out of long-term hospital care. Capital expenditure is mainly related to the Social Housing Development Programme. The budget of 103 million to deliver approximately 1,600 new social homes. Grants of 18 million are administered in relation to disabled facility grants and other renovation grants. The Department's Fuel Poverty Strategy is supported by 15.5 million for the Warm Homes Programme and 3 million for the boiler replacement support. The Housing Executive currently employs approximately 3,380 staff, including around 500 agency staff. They have a unique setup. For accounting purposes only, For the last 2 years, the organisation has been classified as a non-departmental public body and a quasi-corporation. The NDPB carries out the regional housing functions on behalf of the department and is funded by us. And the quasi-corporation is the landlord, which is mainly funded by rental income. The landlord receives minimal funding from the department. It is primarily funded by rental income, which is then used to cover the landlord costs, such as maintaining its properties. The remaining budget within housing is allocated £10 million to the staff costs of about 4.7. The staff manage the relationship with the housing executive and they oversee the programmes that are delivered by them. They also deliver a number of other programmes, including the regulation and inspection of housing associations, delivery of the fuel poverty strategy, shared neighbourhoods under TBUC, supporting the private rented centre, addressing homelessness and supporting vulnerable people who live independently through the Supporting People programme. This division also investigates and develops ways to address issues in the wider housing market, especially increasing overall housing supply. A significant area of work relates to taking forward the Social Housing Reform Programme, which is reviewing how best to deliver social housing and housing functions in the future. Turning to the Cohesion Group, the Community Cohesion Group, this includes most of the functions that are now part of previously of the dissolved Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure. The Historic Environment Division, which transferred from the Department of the Environment, and the Voluntary and Community Division, which transferred from the Department for Social Development. The Community Cohesion Group is centrally placed to work with others in the department and other departments and the wider public, community and voluntary sectors to help deliver the overall vision of the department in supporting people and delivering to help deliver substantial and lasting change across all communities. Around 70% of this group's budget is delivered through the arm's length bodies. Community Cohesion Group is also comprised of the Historic Environment Division with a budget of 61 million, the Public Records Office with a budget of 3.5 million, and the Culture Division, which also includes the language body, arts infrastructure, the creative industries, and it also oversees the work of the Arts Council and the language body. In total, including those of its arm's length bodies, 20 million relates to the Arts Council. 20 million of this covers the Arts Council of 10.3 million and the language body with a budget of 5 million. Sports, Museums and Libraries Division. There is a Sports, Museums and Libraries Division which has a budget of 55 million, and that includes funding for the Libraries NI of 29 million, National Museums of 12 million and Sport NI of 8 million. The Community Cohesion also has a capital division, and this covers a budget of approximately 18 million, 6.7 million of which is allocated to stadiums and 11 million across a variety of the arm's length bodies. And finally, within this area, we have the Voluntary and Community Division, which has a budget of 14.2 million, and this also covers the sponsorship of the Charities Commission Northern Ireland. I'll now pass over to Gillian, who will cover working age and social inclusion.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll begin with the Working Age Group, which has a resource budget of around 194 million and a capital budget of 6.8 million. The majority of Working Age Group's budget, around 116 million, is concerned with the administration of social security benefits, including welfare reforms for working age claimants, the administration of employment services with a budget of around 50 million, and a budget of approximately 32 million for delivery of employment programmes. Social Security Policy and Legislation Division develops Social Security pension and child maintenance policy and legislation in Northern Ireland to ensure parity is maintained with the social security system in Great Britain. Its resource budget is around £2 million. Almost 120 million, or 62% of the budget within Working Age Group, is salaries for staff delivering these services. The group also incurs charges of around 13 million per year for the use of the Department for Work and Pensions IT systems for benefit delivery across both the working age and social inclusion groups. The group has one arm's length body, also Supported Employment Limited. This is a not-for-profit organisation having NDPB and charitable staff and a resource budget of approximately 0.6 million. Working Age Group also provides a benefits processing service to the Department for Work and Pensions in Great Britain for around 280,000 people living in 3 districts within London. The business is funded directly by the Department for Work and Pensions and amounts to around £18 million per year. In terms of capital, Working Age Group has a small capital budget of just under £7 million, which is primarily for the payment of funeral loans and crisis loans. Moving on to the Social Inclusion Group, which has a resource budget of £111 million and capital of £1.5 million. The majority of Social Inclusion Group's budget, around £90 million, is concerned with the administration of social security benefits, including welfare reforms for pension age and disabled claimants. Child maintenance, which promotes the financial responsibility parents have for their children and provides a statutory maintenance service with effective enforcement powers, has a budget of around £19 million. As well as providing child maintenance services for Northern Ireland, services are also provided to a substantial area of eastern and southern England under a service level agreement with the Department for Work and Pensions, which funds this element of the service at around £25 million per year. The group also has responsibility for gender equality, sexual orientation equality and child poverty, and will develop key strategies to tackle social exclusion and poverty across Northern Ireland. Around £59 million, or 53% of the budget within Social Inclusion Group, is salaries for staff delivering these services. Around £13 million of the budget is allocated to address fraud and error in the benefits system through a range of prevention, detection and correction actions across both the working age and social inclusion groups. The group has 2 arm's-length bodies. Firstly, the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Older People. The Commissioner has a role in promoting and safeguarding the interests, advancing equality, challenging discrimination and empowering and enabling the voice of older people in Northern Ireland, with a resource budget of approximately £0.8 million. The Commissioner for Children and Young People aims to safeguard and promote the rights and best interests of children and young people, with a resource budget of around £1.4 million. In terms of capital, the Social Inclusion Group has a small capital budget of £1.5 million, which was primarily to take forward refurbishment of a new site for a Jobs and Benefits office in Downpatrick. Lastly, turning to annually managed expenditure, the Department delivers a range of social security benefits and services for individuals living in Northern Ireland, maintaining over 1 million benefit accounts. Annually managed expenditure, or AME, is funded directly from Treasury outside of the Northern Ireland Executives Block Grant. As Deborah has outlined, it is demand-led and generally less predictable and controllable than DEL expenditure. The Department has a responsibility to ensure that it is properly managed and is required to provide robust estimates of AME to the Office of Budget Responsibility. The total amount of annually managed expenditure which would be controlled by the Department in 16-17 is estimated at £5.9 billion, which will be paid through 28 million payments during the year. The main area of spend is on social security benefits, with around £2.6 billion, or 45% of spend on pension benefits, £1.5 billion, or 25% on disability and carers benefits, and around £1.2 billion, or 20% on working age benefits. The largest single area of spend is £2.2 billion on retirement pension, which accounts for around 38% of total annually managed expenditure. That has been a brief overview of the new department and a summary of the 16-17 budget. We'll be happy to clarify any points of detail or answer any questions you may have.
Okay, any members? Stephen, then I'll take Brad.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the information. In outlining, Deborah, the housing division, some of the provisions you mentioned, warm homes and boiler replacement, and then also obviously through councils there's affordable warmth, and then obviously the Northern Ireland Housing Executive have their own energy efficiency programme within their properties. Is there anything being done to pull those things together and better coordinate the various schemes we have to improve energy efficiency in housing? And I should add within Department for Communities, we've also NICEP hopefully becoming energy-wise and carbon trust loans, so a broad suite of energy efficiency measures. But is there any way we're trying to bring those together, deliver them more efficiently and in a more coordinated fashion?
There's a fairly straightforward distinction between what we're doing compared to DETI, in that we're focused on fuel poverty. So the main scheme, the Affordable Warmth Scheme, is available to people who are earning under 20, or whose income is under £20,000. But I take your point in terms of us working closely together, and we have been working with DETI, over the last few years about ensuring that their schemes don't overlap and don't duplicate, and that work will continue over time. And certainly the whole new thrust of Programme for Government is to ensure that departments work much better together.
And I have to say, it's not even so much I'm worried that they'll overlap or, than anyone's, but my concern, I suppose, from working with people who are seeking to access these funds, you have to establish what their income is, what their tenure is. There's potentially 4 or 5 different numbers they should be phoning if they want to find out how they can improve the energy efficiency in their home. I suppose what I'd like to see is these brought in and a more strategic area by area approach done, where rather than the individual having to work out where they fit, they come to a one-stop shop and we work out where they fit. It's all public money.
Yeah.
It seems strange to me that it's so disaggregated between the different funds.
Well, that's something the department can look at, but it's not our responsibility as part of our group here, but certainly the housing group would take that up with you.
Thank you.
I think that's a very important point, especially over this past number of years, at different periods of the mandates, it looked as if we were starting to get our act together in terms of energy efficiency, and that actually makes sense to have it all under one roof and under one budget so that you can direct it. And I think there's a couple of things from when we moved on to, especially in terms of affordable warmth. And it's just the figures. I don't know about yourself, Andrew, that would have the figures. That there seems to be a big improvement in the time it takes for people to make applications. And there also seems to be an increase of people that are applying for it, and there seems to be a decrease in the amount of complaints that there are against the system from when it has moved in from the early days. Is there any way we can get an update on how that's progressed?
I'm sure Housing Division would give you that. I know it was a new scheme. It took a little bit of time to get it working properly, and some changes were made, but my understanding is that it's now working much better than it did in the very early days.
But even just to make a point that Stephen had spoke about, that if we had a proper strategy in dealing with the efficiency of these things, then it's good for employment, it's good for people's homes, and it's good for people's health. And I think that's it. But secondly, obviously, all the stuff that you talk about in terms of finance, streamlining, efficiencies, has to have an impact on staff. Is there any idea how this will impact on staff, in terms of the reduction of staff and the impact on people's jobs?
Well, the housing executive, like all of government, has had to respond to the overall budget envelope made available to the Department for Communities. So there is, it does have to find savings, and it's currently working through that. We did protect it so that the supporting people budget was maintained at the current level. That was a key priority for the Minister. But it's still, as I understand it, working through the detail of how it responds overall to the overall financial position. But again, I think the Housing Division or the Housing Group will be able to provide some further light on that for you.
Jonathan?
Well, thanks for the presentation. I'm just interested at the start, as we do, we've got the draft programme for government, and I think critically most people are looking towards outcomes. And we want to get it right at the very start, because I certainly want to looking back out in 5 years and saying, as a result of devolved government, this is where you are better off. Now, I think Deputy Secretary mentioned it there when he said about working across departments to achieve those strategic outcomes. At this stage, have we an action plan? Are we developing an action plan to match the outcomes that we're responsible for? Will that action plan be coming to the committee for perusal? And you know, where are we prioritising our immediate areas of work at the start of this mandate?
Okay. Yes, the programme for government, as you know, the draft programme for government has been issued and it has identified the outcomes and the indicators. Work then is ongoing to develop action plans for the indicators which the Department for Communities is taking ownership of. I think there are 10 areas in total. That would include the work for anti-poverty to improve the poverty situation. That's a wider, a wider debate there. So there will be built into the action plan. There will be work associated with addressing health inequalities and improving educational outcomes. There's also a suite of indicators which we're tackling to improve, if you like, the economic inactivity situation, which is helping people back into employment and improve the overall employment position. And then we've got indicators to improve the supply of suitable housing, to increase participation in the arts and sports, and also to improve the lives for disabled people. All of that work is going on at this very moment, with a view to develop action plans by the end of August. And at that time, that will be, I think, then subject to detailed public consultation and aligned with the overall budget process for 2017 onwards. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask, Andrew, if it's going out for consultation by the end of August, what level of engagement will there be with the committee in advance of that?
Well, it's during the summer recess period,
yes.
So I would have thought maybe in September, if early in September, we would want to come and present to you what our proposals are. But certainly, we don't see a problem in sharing our thinking with you. But I'm not sure of the detail just of that process. But,
Okay, just because I was just looking to establish, will the committee be briefed before it goes out to consultation? But it looks like the timings are that it will go out for consultation and then the committee will be briefed.
Well, I say I'm not just sure of the detailed process involved, but I take your point that you would want to be,
yes.
Certainly you would have an opportunity to for us to present what we're suggesting and then to take your views on that. So that there will be a process, I'm sure, which will allow that.
Do any other members wish to ask any further questions? Okay, can I thank you, Andrew, and your team for your attendance today? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move to our next briefing, and I'll refer members to the Clerk's paper at page 34 of your meeting pack. And if I could invite in the following officials. Can I invite Dr. Dennis McMacken, Deputy Secretary, Mr. David Malcolm, Temporary Director of Inclusion and Social Change, and John McCarville, Director of Pensions, Disability and Corporate Services, and Mr. Ian Cassidy, Temporary Director of Social Inclusion, Transition and Planning. And could I invite you to brief the committee? We have previously stipulated that we have quite a packed agenda, so we're trying to keep each of the briefings to 30 minutes, and we're asking officials to be succinct so that we can ask you as many questions as possible within that time frame.
That's great, Chair. Thank you very much. I'll just say a few words if you're happy enough to outline some of our the main issues that we're looking at. So the Social Inclusion Group is very much a new group, and by that I mean it's bringing together functions in a different way that haven't been brought together before. And we have a real interest, obviously, in, as the title suggests, in social inclusion and making sure people are included. And we have a mixture of both policy and operational responsibility, which gives us some levers to be able to do that. So I'll just give you a quick overview. We're responsible for the delivery of key benefits, specifically disability living allowance, and from the 20th of June, personal independence payments. Obviously, that's part of the welfare reform programme, which is being led by Tommy, who has been talking to the committee before, Tommy O'Reilly, and will be talking to you later on. But we're implementing that, obviously, in terms of the actual of making the benefits, making the changes happen. So, in addition to that, then we have, and John will probably want to say a few words about that as you ask, as we go through the questions. With child maintenance services both in Northern Ireland and for a number of areas in GB. So we're both providing services for the local population and also providing those services for England on a contract basis as for employment purposes. We're currently in the process of implementing reforms designed to encourage greater cooperation between parents for the benefit of the child. And one of the things I suppose we're looking at generally is, again, in the context of that, is how we work together as a group to join the dots. Because, you know, for example, when people are coming in to get child maintenance, they're going through a key crisis point in their lives. So there's an opportunity, or they're often going through a key crisis point, so there's maybe ways that we can connect things up. And that's something we're looking at across the group. And then finally, we have a very significant portfolio of policy that's come from what was OFM DFM, now the Executive Office, including poverty and child poverty. The ministers referred to previously, we've begun work on a social strategy, and we're also taking responsibility for a number of indicators under the new programme for government. If you take a look at the programme for government framework, you'll see that a lot of the indicators are relevant to the Department for Communities mandate and or remit rather. And within that context, obviously, we have a particular interest in indicators around poverty, including obviously traditional measures of poverty, but we're also interested in some of the precursors around educational inequalities and health inequalities as well. So that's something we're looking at. And again, rather than going into a lot of detail, Chair, just as you say, probably to give you an opportunity to ask the questions that you want. Just maybe in case I've missed anything, any key points by my colleagues.
Maybe if I could just briefly explain kind of what my directorate's engaged in. It's split into three commands. First of all is operations. We run the pension centre out of Derry and the disability and care service out of Castle Court, responsible for paying DLA, attendance allowance and carers allowance. Also responsible for the delivery of some welfare reforms, changes to the appeal process which were introduced on the 23rd of May, and then also the introduction of personal independence payment, commonly known as PIP, which was launched for new claims on Monday of this week. As Dennis said, I've got responsibility for the implementation of the mitigation schemes arising from the Everson Working Group. Initially, supplementary payments for people affected by the benefit cap are being processed at the moment, and I know the committee was briefed a couple of weeks ago by colleagues on the regulations which will give effect to the other mitigation payments. Then the second area of the group is corporate services, which is responsible for providing ICT support across the department and also in liaising with Department for Work and Pensions across all the benefit systems. It's also responsible for a number of modernisation projects, principally mail opening, scanning and electronic workflow of documents, therefore trying to get rid of the reliance of paper within the offices. We're also looking at improvements to our telephony services, regionalisation of telephony rather than individuals having to ring numbers based on postcode. And the introduction of much more SMS texting and management tools to better manage peak volumes. And then the other area within corporate services is benefit uptake. We're just about to publish a new 3-year strategy on benefit uptake. The previous strategy had a target of generating 30 million on additional benefits over 3 years for people, but we've managed to surpass that by the end of year 2, supporting over 9,000 people. We'll be publishing the evaluation of the 3rd year of that previous strategy in the autumn. And then the final area within the directorate is the Benefit and Information Security Division. which are responsible for combating fraud and reducing error in the benefit system. Over the last few years, the level of fraud has been maintained at historically low levels. Latest published figures reported loss through fraud of 25.2 million, or just 0.5% of benefit expenditure. And financial accuracy is also high. Again, in 14-15, pardon me, we reported financial accuracy across all benefits of 99.4%, with some benefits, state pension and DLA, reporting 99.8% accuracy. The division is also responsible for protection of data we hold on claimants and the promotion of the importance of information security. That's a brief canter over my directorate.
Okay, thank you. Farah?
Sure. There's just a couple of points. Thanks very much for the presentation. And forgive me, I have a bad cold, so that's make me play for understanding the thing. But the point 4, page 35, talks about the development of a single overarching framework and to bring together a number of strategies such as poverty, sexual orientation, gender and disability. Could you give us, is there advantages in it, is there disadvantages in it, has that been worked on, and have you drawn any conclusions?
Well, we're working through the process at the minute, and one of the things we've been doing is engaging with people around pre-consultation to try to just get a view from people as to how they want us to take this forward. I think the first thing to say, it's a really big step forward that we've got a social strategy, and the idea that that would work alongside an economic strategy is really important, because I suppose we've tended to view these things in isolation, but in reality, without the social strategy working, then we're not going to get the economic benefits, and vice versa. So I suppose it's about, to answer your question, I suppose that there's a really good argument for bringing it all together, because what it does is it ensures that we're looking at this in a joined up way, and we're trying to find ways to help. A lot of issues will tend to come back to the same issues, to the same problems, around particularly multi-generational poverty, people generation after generation, same areas. How can we find ways to break that cycle? That's one of the things. The disadvantage, or the not disadvantage so much, but the issue with doing it all in one strategy is that people will want to make sure that they see their respective interests represented. So people from different who experiencing different forms of social exclusion, for example, will want to make sure that they see adequate representation within the strategy. So the challenge is to make sure that a strategy encompasses everything, brings things together, does something, because frankly there's no point in having paper for the sake of paper, but that at the same time, without it being 2,000 pages, it's capturing everybody's needs. So that's what we're trying to work on at the minute, and so we're going to aim to get all that down to a reasonable scale, but at the same time reflect all the interests.
Is there a time frame as to?
So the aim is to have a strategy in the autumn for to be in a draft form to be published alongside the programme for government, but go out to consultation. That's the expectation. But that will be something. Obviously, the minister's looking at this at the minute and will want to think about it. But that's the broad aim, is to have it all to work in the same sort of cycle that's been worked on around the programme for government.
And when we get to that stage, will it be brought back to this committee before it goes into council?
Absolutely, I would expect that we would want the committee to look at these issues, and would want to take your views as soon as we can.
My understanding was that in the last mandate, no FMD, there was an attempt to bring 3 of these strategies together, but it met with considerable opposition, especially within the broad community and voluntary sector. There's some people looking at this may say that it's bringing it back dressed up in another sooner close. So what would be the answer to that?
I suppose the difference this time is around the strategy itself won't be, well, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is, if you look at the programme for government, it's a very different approach that's been taken. And I would acknowledge we are in new territory, and we're working our way through that. What we're going to be judged on, certainly as senior responsible owners, is not the paper we produce, but actually the impacts or otherwise that we achieve on the ground to working with others. So part of this is about making sure, the document will summarise that work and we'll say, here's what we're trying to do, but it's going to be about much more than a document. I think that's the first thing. And there'll be detailed action plans that will have to go around, that will go alongside it. But as I say, I understand people's concerns that they want to make sure that whatever their specific needs are adequately represented. So, and I mean, I know the Minister recognises that as well. So I suppose the question is, how do we construct something that will meet their needs and that people will see what they need to see in the strategy to give them reassurance?
Just one final thing, because in the last presentation, I had argued that there needs to be in certain aspects of a strategy of bringing people together under one roof, but a lot of these are completely individual strategies dealing with very important issues, and there always has been a concern, but once you bring them all together, then it lessens certainly the resources that may be put into it, and the overall impact of trying to do something about it.
Well, as I say, one of the things we're doing at the minute is just engaging with stakeholders, and we'll get their views about that. So, and that'll have to feed into the process. So, but as I say, that's the thinking at this point, is to try to do as much of it as possible in a combined strategy. Because the other side of it is, we've had a situation in the past where we had a lot of strategies which didn't necessarily produce what we wanted them to produce.
Sure. It's just one final thing, and I've done this nearly every time people have come up in terms of consultations. I was at a special health trust meeting, Belfast Health Trust meeting, and it was purely on the recommended their proposed closures of some day centres and mental health facilities. What had happened 7 months ago, that the consultation was a completely wrong way to go about it in terms of its handling of the thing. And there has to be a new approach on how we actually deal with consultations and how we get people's opinions. Because if people had a bother to sit down and speak to people, they knew that there would have been total opposition. So I just would urge people to look at our consultations are handled, how they interface, because what often happens is that when you go through the list of consultees, it's just the usual suspects. And it's the usual suspects that respond to it. And people need to be in communities, because especially in these strategies here will have a huge impact on many of the most vulnerable people in our society, and we need to ensure that we're getting the proper feedback on it.
That's a fair point. Just to say, one of the things in recognising the fact that we don't pretend for 1 minute we've got all of the skills we need to do this, but one of the things is we're partnering with others from the very beginning. So we've got NICFA, for example, involved, helping us to structure some of this to get. But I take your point about going into communities as well, and that'll be absolutely crucial, both in the strategy itself, but more importantly in the delivery. That's the piece.
Naomi? Thanks for the presentation. You'll obviously be aware of the historic difficulties that you will have inherited due to the lack of a sexual orientation strategy and the impact that has had on government funding to LGBT organisations who are providing services now on a voluntary basis effectively, because the lack of a strategy means that they cannot access government funding for the work that they do. Could you explain how that will be resolved through the proposals that you're bringing forward, and whether or not there will need to be a standalone strategy in order to address that? Because obviously they've been in that position now for a considerable length of time, and it has put those resources under a fair degree of pressure, I think it would be fair to say. So I'd just be interested to know, first of all, what you plan to do about that, but also how quickly, just given the urgency that's attached.
Well, all of this, the timetable for this is set around the programme for government, in the sense that we're working within that framework. So that means that we have to basically, over the coming months, engage with all of the key stakeholders, obviously including LGB groups and the community. And I suppose it's about that work forward through that. I can't give you a definitive answer about whether or not it will require, it will be a decision will be taken about whether it's a single strategy or a comprehensive social strategy. It's the same point that was discussed earlier. because there'll be other, like in addition to LGB, there'll be other groups as well who will feel similarly. Maybe that they want a similar strategy, a separate strategy, or may also feel that actually they'd prefer to be part of a bigger strategy because it's putting it, getting them at the top of the table. Because if you think about it, when we're talking about this social strategy, there's going to be 3 at the top: the programme for government, the social and economic, 4 investment strategy as well. So that really puts it at the top of the table. So it's a balance, it's a trade-off between, on the one hand, being represented at that level, but at the same time making sure that the commitments are there that will that the groups will feel meet their needs. So that's all I can say at this stage, in the sense that we're developing it, but we recognise very much the issue. There's a very serious issue, not just about LGB, a whole range of different groups. I mean, disability as well. We've an issue there, if I'm being honest, that we need to look at as well. So it's how do we make sure that I mean, for me, the paper isn't as important as what we do. And it's about, the question is how, but I think the paper is also important, don't get me wrong.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the point. I mean, what you do obviously is the important bit, but without the paper,
I agree.
Those groups have been unable to access any funds because there is no strategy in place under which they can get government funding, and that makes it a genuine issue. I mean, no one wants paper for the sake of it, but equally, if paper is the passport to be able to access the funding for crucial work that you do, the paper becomes very important. And I guess that's really where my concern lies, is that we end up in a very wide-ranging strategy that doesn't actually assist people in accessing the resources they need to deliver the services, which they are doing in default of government, but no services in place. So it's supplementing what's already there. It's offering support to people in the community who need that support, but it's being done on a voluntary level because of a governance failure, not because of their failure. And so I think it's important that we have some reassurance that those issues will be ironed out and that people will be able to access funding appropriately through a proper structure and through a proper strategy that actually delivers on the agenda that obviously is going to be agreed through the programme for government and the other elements of governance.
I mean, what I can say is we will certainly be looking at, I very much agree with the point, we'll be looking at those issues, and I take the point that you're making. And I think also the other thing I was going to say is it's also important for groups as well to feel represented in the documentation, so that they can see that they're being represented.
And it's one of the elements, I think, of social exclusion, is that if people don't feel that their voice is heard and that their views are properly reflected, you don't really address the issue of exclusion. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I don't underestimate the scope of the work that you've got to do. The nature of what you're doing in terms of combating social inclusion, it includes education, it includes health, it includes the economic department. It's if we can get them all working together, then the strategy will be at its most effective. I mean, we saw that before in previous schemes where we tried with young people in the previous mandate with low levels of attainment or just on the borderline at GCSE level. And the evidence was showing if we can get young people with 5 GCSEs, they can lift themselves out of poverty, and very often then that has the knock-on effect for family poverty and health and everything else. How can we ensure that all the departments know what the rules are, I suppose, within this, and not get the case where everybody thinks somebody's doing it and somebody thinks everybody's doing it, and the reality is nobody's doing it? I mean, how can we make sure in an action plan that, one, we've got cross-departmental working behind the strategy, and two, that if it's not coming from one individual department, that we can call that in so the whole chain, as it were, doesn't alter?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, we have, I suppose the issue here is, the difference, I suppose, is we're talking about numbers at this stage. Now, I know when you're talking about issues such as social exclusion and poverty, it's about more than numbers. But I think in the past, when we've looked at these issues, we've looked at them, put together a strategy, put together maybe an action plan, which is various different actions. But we haven't started from the position of saying, okay, if we have a particular indicator to move, so say it's 5+ GCSEs, including Maths and English, how do we get that, we use this terminology, turning the curve, but how do we move that indicator? And that gets you into a very different mindset. And it's a real challenge, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's early days, but it is a real challenge because you start to think, well, okay, what specifically is going to make a difference here? And there have been programmes in the past that have definitely had an impact. I mean, for example, as you remember from OFM DFM, one of the 6 signature projects around educational inequality seems to have had a big impact. I think we moved from 1 percentage point per annum increase in non-grammar schools, getting 5+ GCSEs, from 1% per annum increase to 7 percentage points in the last 2 years. So that's a real... Now, again, we can't say definitively, is that all down to that programme? We're going to have a pretty good guess at it on the basis of the evidence. And I suppose it's about trying to find very real projects like that or programmes like that that can make a difference, but also it's about trying to join what we already have. So one of the things, as I said earlier, we're looking at is how do we get a join up between, even within departments. I mean, Department for Communities is a huge department, 8,500 civil servants. Can we find ways to join the dots between the different parts of it? So, for example, one of the things that people mightn't think of in terms of poverty and social exclusion is around sports, culture and arts, and there's an opportunity there to start to bring people in a way that's, maybe bring people in who maybe haven't had a background in education or haven't had any success in education, to start to include them and involve them in work that suddenly makes them realise, oh right, I have got more ability than I thought. So I suppose the point, to finish the point, how do we get them to work together? Trying to get departments to work together through this structure of senior responsible owners. And we've been meeting up broadly every 2 weeks. And certainly we've been taking a lot of advice from Scotland around this and their experience. And they said that one of the things that they found was that the SROs getting together tended to hold each other to account. That was one of the things that happened. You started to get into much more real discussions rather than sort of talking in general terms. You started to get into real discussions about numbers and about who's going to support whom to get a particular result. So I don't know if that's any help to you, but it's. I'll be honest with you, it's going to be. I have no doubt we will learn through this process, and some of this will not go the way we want it to. Some of it will go better than we want it to, because there'll probably be things that we don't expect that'll come out of this. But all we can do is try to hold each other to account, and then ultimately it'll all come under Malcolm McKibben as the senior responsible owner for the programme for government, and he will hold us to account. And as you know, Malcolm, I'm sure he will.
Oh, we'll monitor that, Chair. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I just have 3 questions. The first one is just to get, I know that we have requested a written briefing, but even just to get a succinct update on each of the individual strategies. Obviously there's a degree of scepticism, understandably so, when we start to talk about an overarching strategy when there has been a lack of progress. Just to get a quick update on where each of those are presently. My second question is obviously around child poverty, which is critical. We all know the facts and the figures. Has there been an assessment of the impact of welfare cuts on child poverty in particular? Because I think that will be critical if we are to try to get this strategy right. And my third question is around budgeting. A number of members have touched on the importance of cross-departmental approach and delivering outcomes across departments. What I wanted to know was around budgeting. In the meetings that you're having to date, where is the thinking around thematic budgeting? And if you could just give us an insight from a departmental official point of view.
Okay, well, maybe to start off with the first one, and then I'll take it.
Yeah, so we have provided just a very brief reply to the committee on the position of all the strategies we brought in from the then OFM DFM that we've now inherited. So what we've done is we've just updated the committee on where they actually were when the transfer took place. So the disability strategy has already been extended until 2017 to allow more time. It was extended by OFM DFM, it was due to expire in 2015, so that's still currently ongoing, so it is, and we're now looking at when it expires, how do we take it forward as part of the social strategy that Dennis talked about. So that is a position that is still live. An active ageing strategy was launched by OFM DFM in January 16, and so it has specific actions and indicators. So again, it's now been transferred across to a stage where we're looking to see how do we take that, what is the next step. There's no specific action plan around that yet, so we're looking to see again, can that be incorporated into the social strategy. A gender equality strategy is due to expire this year, So again, it's one of the strategies we're looking at to see how can we take that forward, the replacement of that. Is it a separate standalone strategy again, or does it get incorporated into a wider piece of work? The sexual orientation strategy, again, there was some work done by officials on a draft of strategy that hadn't been cleared at transfer, so that has now come across to us. And again, without wanting to sound like again, it's now something, as Dennis said, we're looking at in terms of whether it goes forward as a standalone strategy or it's something that we incorporate into a wider piece of work. A child poverty strategy has just been an updated child poverty strategy published on the 29th of March. In the last mandate, it has 4 specific outcomes that need to be taken forward. We're now also taking forward work to publish the annual report for last year, and that will go out around departments, so it will in the coming days, with a view to being led in the Assembly as we were required. And then finally, the requirement of a poverty strategy. There was a High Court challenge last year, which there was a requirement to deliver a poverty strategy, and that is what the social strategy that Dennis has been talking about. Well, specifically, we'll make sure that it meets the obligations of Section 28E of the Northern Ireland Act, so it is a defined anti-poverty strategy. So, as the Minister said in topical questions a couple of weeks ago, there are a raft of strategies that we have brought on board. What we're now doing is, because a number of them either have expired or are due to expire, we've now got an opportunity to look at the new approach under the programme of government and see whether we take them forward in a different way now, or simply try to bring them forward in their own still specific strategies, but maybe in a more outcome-focused manner.
And then, in terms of your second question, there's been various pieces of work done on this over a number of years, obviously in the lead up to this and around some of the debates around this. So there has been research on the impact of welfare reform, and I'm sure Tommy, who's on after me, can talk about that more broadly in terms of welfare reform.
On children?
On the impacts at all. Impacts on families and would include children as well. From memory, there was a report actually that covered those issues that was commissioned in OFM-DFM, for example, previously. And I'm happy to have a look to see what we can get for you around that. And again, I'll talk to colleagues about that. And the final question, budgeting, thematic budgeting. Again, at this, interesting thing about this is, there will need to be a discussion about budgets, and the budget. This will feed into the budget process. Obviously, we're still developing the work, so as we're doing the current budget process, there's a limit to how much we can change things. But I think it's also important to say that one of the things that's driven this approach is a realisation that where we've tried to tackle some of the fundamental problems previously, we haven't necessarily found that money of itself has made the difference. So that's not to take away for 1 minute that this will need to be funded and funded properly as the process develops. But the issue is that there's a lot of things that we could be doing by joining things up more effectively. So that's as well. But the process will obviously this year. Business plans and budgets will take into account as far as they can where we've got to with the work, but inevitably there will be more. There'll have to be further budget changes in the coming years as the work takes hold.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Dennis, and thank you to your colleagues as well for your attendance at the committee today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, members, so we're moving to our next briefing. It's Deputy Secretary briefing on working age, and just to refer you to the clerk's paper, page 40 of the meeting packs, and just to invite the following officials to the committee table. Mr Tommy O'Reilly, Deputy Secretary, David Sales, Director, Universal Credit, and Geraldine Brereton, Assistant Director of Central Benefits. I believe, Tommy, you have a hard copy of your presentation, which we're going to circulate to the members. Okay, so I'll invite you to kick off then.
Yes. So, Chair, the way I intend to run this really is just a short presentation. I'm only looking it up in terms of the first couple of slides, and then each of our colleagues is going to speak to the slides and trying to get through in about 10 or 15 minutes max. Any questions? Yeah. So, in terms of the working age group, the main focus is to help people improve their lives by helping those people who want to work, get them into work, and providing support for those who are unable to. And the first slide really sets out the size of the budget within the working age group, about 184 million running costs and about 6.8 million capital. There's just over 4,000 staff involved in that. In terms of the group structure, there are 4 assistant directors in it, and David, who runs the Universal Credit, Amit Cleary, who looks after social security policy, Brian, who looks after working age services, and we have a vacant post at the moment for employability, health and benefit policy, and I'm back to second it. In terms of the key challenges under the programme for government outcomes, this group, I'm the SRO for 3 of the outcomes, and that is reduce economic inactivity, increase economic opportunities for our most deprived communities, and reduce underemployment. And we're currently in the process of starting the consultation processes around the various groups around how that's actually going to work. And the second challenge is really bringing together the single organisation. The Employment Service was formerly part of the Department for Employment and Learning, and the SSA Local Area Network, and bringing those 2 together into a single organisation to deliver a high-quality service to the customers is one of the priorities for the next number of years. We've also got the legislation arising from the Welfare Reform and Work Order, which is due to go through the Parliament and Westminster in the next number of months, and also the recommendations from the Professor Edison report. And we're taking the lead in terms of getting those implemented. Preparation for the introduction of universal credit next year in Northern Ireland, and then securing the ongoing future for the Belfast Benefit Centre. As you know, the Belfast Benefit Centre currently employs just over 700 staff, both in Belfast and in Derry, providing services into London for the Department for Work and Pensions. And it's on a 3-year contract. And again, we're trying to secure its future to become a universal credit centre for DWP going forward and secure those jobs. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Geraldine.
Obviously, Working Age Services then is delivering services to working age customers, which is 16 to 24. We provide financial assistance to support them whilst they move into work. We also support people who are ill, and it's all about a very personalised service to match the needs of the customer. The services are delivered by 1,600 odd staff working through 39 local offices, jobs and benefits offices. There's a mix in terms of the structure of those offices. Some are currently joined up and delivering the jobs and benefits service. Some we have co-located the social security office in the jobs centre, although they're not delivering the full joined up service yet, and some are still in separate sites. So there's work that we need to do to obviously prepare those offices for delivery of universal credit. There's a range of services offered from the offices. They provide advice, guidance and support to the unemployed claimants, including those with a health condition or disability, in relation to applying for a benefit or dealing with any issues around the benefit. And obviously then there's the employment-related side, where we work with clients to actually move them closer to work and ultimately into work. Alongside that then, there is the ESSA Centre in Belfast, which has approximately 580 staff delivering the benefit-related aspects of employment support allowance to over 120,000 claimants. There are challenges there in terms of the policy intent around ESSA, where we were moving away from people being on benefit for basically being inactive for long periods of time. So working with our policy colleagues, we are looking at what additional support we need to put in for the ESSA claimants, and there is research has been conducted into the caseload, and we'll come back and brief the committee on that research and the way forward with regard to employment support allowance. Tommy's already mentioned the Belfast Benefit Centre, and I would say this is one of the top performing sites for DWP. There are a number of centres across GB. The Belfast Benefit Centre, which is on 2 sites, Lissahallie in Londonderry and the Plaza in Belfast, currently delivers services to customers in the London home counties. We are amongst the top 10 sites in GB. We deliver for IS, JSA and ESSA, and Lissahallie in Londonderry processes the benefit cap for the whole of GB. We obviously need to now secure the future of that site going forward, because we are beginning to see impacts as the IS and JSA register decreases with the rollout of universal credit in Great Britain and the London home counties. So we are engaged with DWP about the future of the centre going forward, because we want to make sure that we can secure the jobs. In terms of our challenges, and Tommy's already referred to some of them, we have a HR challenge because with the decreasing registers, we need to make sure that we have the right staff in the right locations delivering the right services. And obviously the local offices are being impacted by the introduction of the various welfare reform initiatives and what that means in supporting customers. We have with the closure of Social Fund in October this year under welfare reform, we are standing up a Northern Ireland specific scheme which is discretionary support, which will replace community care grants and crisis loans. This has been designed specifically for Northern Ireland. It will be delivered out of our local offices plus a number of service centres, and there's work currently being taken forward to stand that service up at the end of October for the first claims, first applications coming in on the 1st of November. It is very much about financial support and assisting customers and claimants to become financially independent. It will extend the service to a wider customer pool, and that you'll not need to be on a qualifying benefit. It'll be set at the national living wage, which is £14,960 odd, so it'll increase the customer base and it'll bring in those on low income. The other thing facing working age services is around the introduction of the social sector size criteria, the bedroom tax, and work's ongoing around its introduction, and obviously the executive will have decided to mitigate it, and what that mitigation scheme looks like and how we implement it.
Okay. So obviously, Chair, in terms of the decision to, whenever the Department for Communities was created, one of the benefits and sense of the disbanding of the Social Security Agency and bringing together with the Employment Service was an opportunity really to look at the policy side and what that actually meant and integrate that across. And so the new group has taken on board the Employability, Health and Benefit Policy Group. And that's really looking to have a look at the social welfare aspects and how we really go and looking at the questions around work, health and well-being. And because to the degree we've been operating in the silos, Social Security is looking after the benefit payments, the Department for Employment and Learning were looking after the employment bits, but there was never any joined upness really going on there. So there's a real opportunity to sort of, how do we actually help people find work, stay in work and progress in work, and that's sort of some of the key themes. We're also looking from a social welfare perspective at things that we're working in terms at the moment with the credit unions, financial capability, and trying to improve that in terms of right across Northern Ireland, trying to improve the provision. And looking at low-income consumers, and as Julian said, in terms of particular issues around discretionary. So that policy group has also got, we're looking clearly in terms of at the moment the PFG, with Programme for Government, Economic and Activity. This group has taken this policy team, has taken the lead in developing up the action plans. And the Steps to Success programme, which has been in place now for about 18 months, there are some issues with it, and we really want to have a look at the employment programmes, all of them, and see how to make them work more effectively, and that's one of the priorities. And then really the disability strategy for helping getting people into employment. You've got about 67% of people who are disabled in Northern Ireland are not in the employment market, not in the labour market. So why? Well, how do we help them back into the work, whether that is through additional support or new opportunities with employers? It's about looking at those and getting that put in place. So that's the responsibility of that team within the Working Age Group. Jane.
Okay. Social Security Policy and Legislation Division develops policy and legislation for the areas of social security, pensions and child maintenance here. We also seek at as early stage as possible to ensure that requirements for people here are included in the development of wider UK social security, child maintenance and pensions policy in line with Section 87 of the Northern Ireland Act. We specifically develop policy and legislation with the aim to provide a comprehensive system of financial help for people who need it, encouraging personal responsibility and improving incentives to work in terms of child maintenance to ensure that parents who live apart maintain their children where they can afford to do so, and to provide a comprehensive system to support people in retirement through both state and private pensions. To this end, our division would progress both primary and subordinate legislation, and in recent years we would put through an average of 1 to 2 bills across the 4 areas and between 80 and 100 sets of regs, so we would be up here quite a bit through the year. We're structured across 42 staff, and we're structured across the 4 broad policy areas. So there's working age benefits, so JSA, income support, ESA, housing benefits, state pension credit and welfare reform. The state and private pensions team, who also look after international and EU issues and reciprocal arrangements with GB. the Universal Credit team, and then my team, which looks after disability benefits, DLA, attendance allowance, personal independence payment and carers allowance, industrial injuries, and then common provisions, which is kind of across all the benefits. So claims and payments, decisions and appeals, revisions and recovery of overpayments, and we also look after social fund and child maintenance. At the policy branch, we come under Section 87 of the Northern Ireland Act. So that provides for a coordinated system of social security and child maintenance. Section 88 of the same Act, which provides for financial adjustments between GB and Northern Ireland to allow for maintenance parity, and the Statement of Funding Principles, which sets out the arrangements between the Treasurer and involved administrations. So in terms of a forward look, we would be ongoing amendments to legislation as required. Pensions has come through quite significant reform recently with the new state pension system and the rollout of automatic enrolment. There's also proposed to be a new pensions bill, subject to the Minister and the Executive's approval. On child maintenance, you heard from David Malcolm earlier, so there would have been quite significant reforms there in relation to the 2012 scheme and a more improved customer-focused service and the introduction of charging. So in terms of child maintenance, the move towards one single statutory system, ongoing implementation of the reform and preparation for the 30-month evaluation of the reforms. You see the legislation's in place, and so we're just looking at various pieces of work of that, and I think you'll go into more detail on UC. And then on the working age, the welfare reform order just went through Westminster as part of the Fresh Start Agreement, and about 30 sets of regulations in relation to that, introducing PIP and mandatory consideration, UC and various other reforms. And then we're looking forward to the welfare, we're not looking forward to, we're seeing that coming up the welfare reform and work order and the related regs coming out of it.
Good morning. I manage the universal credit delivery within Northern Ireland. And universal credit, just to remind you, is going to replace 6 existing benefits from its introduction. And the 6 benefits it's replacing are JSA income-based, employment support allowance income-based, income support, working tax credit, child tax credit and housing benefit. So those 6 benefits will all be replaced by universal credit. So effectively, universal credit provides support for the 18 to 64-year-old group who are out of work or in low income. There are expected to be 270,000 households in Northern Ireland impacted and entitled to universal credit. The benefit itself will be delivered from our existing network of local offices and 3 service centres in Foyle, Newry and Castle Court. From a claimant perspective, it's quite a different system. Most people will apply online and manage their claim online. And the aim of universal credit from a policy intent is to ensure that it's better to work while supporting those who need it. There are a number of changes which remove financial and administrative barriers from the existing systems, which means that, for example, benefits aren't suddenly removed, so it encourages people into work. And there are work allowances within the benefit which help people move in and out of work without having to make a new claim. So there would be some of the barriers that would put people off from activating themselves in the labour market under the existing scheme. You'll be aware of the Northern Ireland payment flexibilities that the Executive secured in the last mandate around twice monthly payments to claimants instead of a single payment as it is in GB, direct payment of housing costs to landlords and split household payments. So those things are very much secured and in our planning. We're currently working with DWP to agree our go-live dates and we expect to begin a geographic rollout of fresh claims to universal credit from September of next year and roll round on a geographic basis completing by June 18, so between September 17 and June 18. Fresh claimants, so people who become unemployed or sick in that period, will move on to universal credit. And once that period of fresh claims is finished, we then expect to begin managed migration of existing benefit claimants in July 18, complete that by 2021. So by 2021, the legacy benefits will all be closed and all claimants will be on universal credit.
Okay, Chair. So happy at point take any questions.
Okay, yep, Chair, Fra.
Sure, it's just taking the last question, the last presentation first. There was obviously some considerable difficulties in the rollout of universal credit in England. Are you foreseeing any similar type of problems here? Or are you expecting just a seamless rollout of it? And along with that, you're talking about the geographical rollout.
Yes.
Where will it start and where will it be complete?
Okay, well, in terms of DWP and where they are at the moment, universal credit began on April 13 in GB. Currently, there's about 250,000 customers in receipt of universal credit, so it's been a very slow build-up. From their point of view, they're now at a stage where they've 700 job centres to roll universal credit out to, and they're at a stage where they've been rolling out 5 job centres a month, so a very controlled rollout. Now they're moving up to 50 job centres a month from February 17. So at that point, they obviously see that the system itself, the IT system itself, will be in good enough shape to increase a 10-fold increase. And then from February 17 right through to June 18, as I say, 50 job centres a month. So because we aren't going live until September 17, we have a good period now for the system to bed in. They update the system on a fortnightly basis, so there are a lot of kind of fortnightly releases between now and then. So our expectation is certainly it wouldn't be a seamless service in Northern Ireland, but we'd be able to benefit from that experience in DWP and do our local planning around the developments that will happen in that intervening period. In terms of your second question, we're doing that planning at the moment to determine which order our offices would roll out, and we haven't quite finished that work yet. Geraldine touched earlier on the structure of offices that we have. We have some job centres, we have some social security offices, and we have some combined jobs and benefits offices. So in each town, or depending on the footprint in that town, we'll need to plan universal credit accordingly. So I imagine I'll be in front of the committee many times, and when we get that kind of detail, I'm happy to bring it back.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I just come back? And all of that, when this hits the ground running, there will be a reliance on staff to roll that out. You know, there has been some concerns that there may be some type of agenda there for reduction of staff across the board, especially at a time when in this place you're arguing for the relocation of departmental structures and jobs in the areas of that have never had them before. And one that came to mind there during the week I'd heard of was the likes of Magherafelt, the closure of the building there and that being moved out of that town elsewhere. Is there a proposal there that for the reduction of staff, and what's the latest on the relocation of staff or buildings, especially west of the pond? And thirdly, the Magherafelt situation.
Okay, so in terms of where we are thinking about over the next couple of years, in terms of working age, we're likely to see over the next 3 years an increase of staffing by about 1,000 people as a consequence of introducing the welfare reform processes. Because of the fact that we have to run dual systems, we have to run the existing legacy systems as well as run the new systems. So during that period of time, we'll actually see an increase in staff. And then that'll start to come back down again once we start to move through this big major phase of welfare all being implemented. At which point then, you're then 5 years down the road, 3 to 5 years down the road, and the world will have changed again by that stage. So at the moment, there are no plans to significantly reduce staffing numbers around any of our offices. On an annual basis, presently, we go into all of our offices and check against the workloads to make sure that we have the right number of staff in the offices in order to deliver the services. That's just part of normal business. But just bringing together the Employment Service and the Social Security bit together has just created a situation where we have some surpluses. But we're managing that as part of normal business. In terms of universal credit, the intention is that the local office network, as presently there, largely speaking, will remain as it is. So the Magherafelt, there are no plans to close Magherafelt. There are issues at Magherafelt, as there are in some of the other offices, where there are too many staff that are needed in terms of the workloads, but that's something that we're looking at the moment. And we have to get prepared for universal credit because we've got staff involved in JSA, IAS, ESSA, and those benefits are going to disappear over the next number of years. So we've got to find those staff new work in terms of the new benefits, and we're going through a process of doing that at the moment, where staff are having the opportunity to apply for jobs. So as an example, we've got at the moment about 300-400 jobs who have been involved in PIP and also in terms of benefit cap. They were all advertised within the Social Security Agency. 1,200 staff applied for those, and we've been selecting those staff, and they're coming out of local offices, right? And then we're backfilling or not backfilling depending on the numbers in that office. So we're just going through a process of adjusting all of the offices in order to deal with the new benefits. But there are no plans for redundancies, and there's no plans at the moment to close large offices. There's not.
Sure, and that's, and I'll go back to the people that said it a bit matter-of-fact, but I still was unclear on whether there would be job losses matter-of-fact, but as one time it says that there are probably more people there than it is required to do specific tasks.
That's correct.
And then what will happen to that staff?
Those staff will be offered jobs within Working Age or within the Department for Communities.
And the 1,000 jobs that you're speaking about, is that new jobs, or is it jobs that will be filled by the likes of Dale coming across, or other aspects of it?
There will be some the staff who come across in the Department for Communities will get some of those. But we've got a hump, and so at the moment we're currently advertising for EO2s on fixed-term contract basis, right? And that's out in the open market. And we have a large number of people who applied for those. So we'll use those, in a sense, as a backfill. So, and therefore those people will be able to come in, be trained, use them and then release them, whilst we sort out our permanent staff, because we have to manage this over the next number of years, and it's a significant HR challenge in doing that, and that's what we're doing within the department at the moment.
So let me put it another way.
Yes.
Do you see, from what you say, especially with 1,000 jobs, do you see a significant increase in the amount of staff in your department, or will there be a decrease in staff over the next 2 to 5 years?
Over the next 3 years, there'll be an increase in staffing within the department as a consequence of welfare reform. Okay.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
No, I think that we should give some credit, Chair, to the work that the team has done. I mean, it's been the last number of years has been a very intense year and difficult in terms of changing legislation and preparing for it and getting ourselves in pole position. I think there's been a lot of really good work done, which we're grateful for. One of the areas in particular I think Northern Ireland was most successful under was in the mitigation measures against, helping the most vulnerable people. Now, I understand there's a series of secondary legislation in relation to that. Can you give us an outline of the timeline for that, and when we can see that coming before the House and the committee?
So the first set of legislation went through in March of this year.
Yep.
Second set is actually in the Assembly next Monday, and that's the 4 sets of regulations for disability premiums and also then for discretionary support. There will be a further set of regulations coming to this committee in September and also in October, and that will cover both the social sector size criteria mitigation scheme, but also the cost of working allowance under universal credit. And then there will be a final set of regulations which will really be a wrap-up in terms of any areas that we feel that we haven't picked up in the initial sets of regulations. So we're hoping that by the end of this year, all of the regulations for all of the mitigating schemes will be in place. In parallel, we're running the operational arrangements, and we've started to make payments for housing benefit for those people who are impacted by housing benefits. We're currently receiving their mitigating or their supplementary welfare payments at the moment, and that's being paid directly to landlords. And we're now preparing for those who are going through the PIP assessment, and we will have the new schemes with staff in place and the operational procedures in place for September. So anyone who suffers financially as a consequence of the changes will then receive their payments starting in September. So the work's moving at pace. It's quite challenging for all of the policy teams and legislative teams in getting through, as well as the operational teams. And but we're getting there at the moment, so we are. It's moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for missing your open presentation. I was hosting an event upstairs that I committed to before I was put on this committee. So, just a brief question. Fra mentioned the issue of employment. Are you operating in the voluntary exit scheme at the same time as recruiting, or is it not open to your staff?
The ES is closed now, so it is. Last year, well, before the creation of the new department, the Social Security Agency lost about 350 staff out of the organisation. I can't remember what the Employment Service lost.
This year it was about 100, I think.
100, yeah. Those staff all left the organisation, yes, as part of our cost efficiency as well. That better some of our reductions, budget reductions.
But we're having to go back out and recruit again?
Rather than having to go back out and recruit again, yes, so it let us do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. I just have a few questions. I know that this is in a lot of people's minds. What happens to them after the period of mitigation runs out? Just to get view on that. The second thing is around work appears multiple times in the presentation, and rightly so, but when you talk to people with disabilities, they find that there still remains a significant number of barriers to getting into employment, particularly within the private sector, and that touches on issues like public transport as well. So just to get some feeling on how that's practically going to work, that particular drive. The other thing was, in your presentation under the universal credit delivery, it says that most people will apply and manage their claim online. Get a bit of clarity on that, because I just know from my own constituency work that I have a significant number of people who don't use computer at all, and don't have access to computer and aren't internet savvy, and a number of them are young. So just what avenues are open to people who find themselves in that situation? And then just in the previous session, their briefing session, I had asked a question around the impact of welfare cuts on child poverty and children in particular, and he kicked it over to you, Tommy. So I was just, when I've got you there, if I could get you just to answer that for me, please.
Okay. So the 4 questions then, in the sense of, do you want to pick up universal credit first?
Okay. Yeah. In terms of universal credit, I mean, first and foremost, as I said earlier, it'll be a digital service, so people will have to claim online and manage their claim online, but we won't be just cutting people off and expecting them to go away and do that. We'll be helping them through that process. So we touched earlier about the network of local offices, so people will still be able to come in and we will provide help and support. We will actually have facilities in all offices that we'll take customers over to and help and encourage and show how they can do that. Similarly, we're not going live until September 17, so we plan to work with claimants in the intervening period to try and improve digital skills. Universal Credit itself is available as an app, so it's capturing all kind of avenues. So there'll be a programme of work to support customers in doing that, and working with our staff to be able to claim online and manage their claim online.
I have to say also, we're also working with the advice sector. So we're having discussions with the advice organisations about how do they help us deliver this service. So what services can they provide to help people who are vulnerable, who need some support. So there's an alternative to the local offices as well. And those discussions are continuing at the moment with the advice organisations. So they are. So in terms of the other questions, in terms of the issue of mitigation in the 4-year period, well, in a sense, that's really an issue for the executive. The executive is committed to 4-year funding, and they've also committed to review after 3 years. So as far as we're concerned at the moment, we've been asked to take forward the mitigations for 4 years, and there will be a review during that period, at which point then the executive will tell us what they want to do. So it's very much a matter for the executive rather than for officials in that sense. The second question then, in terms of the disability, I mean, you're quite right, Chair, in the sense that there are those issues, those barriers. The reason why we have actually set up the team to do this work is specifically because we recognise that they're there. So how do we work with Dennis's team in terms of disability and the strategy? How do we join up to make sure that we can support the efforts about trying to help disabled people back into the labour market and avoid social inclusion, and working across departments? But at least we're going to take the lead, and we're actually resourcing that up to be the lead to help ensure that disabled people know there's somewhere they can come and get some support to help address some of those barriers. And we can work with employers on that basis. And that's the purpose of the employment strategy for the disabled. And finally, in terms of the third issue, and the one that Dennis passed over to me, in terms of where we are, as you know, there have been 2 studies carried out by IFS, or OFM-DFM. At the time, whenever they were published, we disagreed with their conclusions. We still disagree with their conclusions in the sense that they took no account of universal credit in their initial studies. We're about to publish an evaluation strategy for welfare reform from within the Department of Communities, which will set out how we're going to go forward in evaluating the impact of all of the various measures in real time, and run that over the next number of years and have that evidence available. So the statistical teams have been pulling that together now over the last number of months, and we hope to publish that in the very near future.
So the answer is no?
So the answer is no, in the sense that the answer is no, not only in terms of Northern Ireland, but also in terms of Great Britain as well.
So when you're saying about that evaluation and that statistical analysis, will that specifically look at the impact of welfare cuts on children and child poverty?
We'll look at right across in terms of all the Section 75 areas, in terms of those families with children, or couples with children as well, be one of the groups that we'll be looking at, and the impact of that.
Thank you. Naomi?
Yeah. I just wanted to come back, first of all, thank you for the presentation, but I wanted to come back a wee bit what you were saying around support for people who are going to be obviously having to deal with online application for benefits and so on. And you mentioned about the support of the advice sector. I mean, will you be funding additional resource then to the advice sector in order to allow them to provide that? Because my experience in the constituency office is that as advice sector services have been squeezed and their funding has been cut, that actually they have been in a weaker position, possibly than at any other time I can recall over the last 16 years in terms of being able to provide the kind of advice and guidance and detailed support, particularly for claimants who have complex needs. Because we now get a significant number of people referred to us by the advice sector to our constituency offices. And I have to say, thanks to the way they're now being managed, we've also more limitations around what we can actually do there as well, compared to what would have been the case in the past. So, I mean, will there be specific resource put aside, or is this something that we're expecting the advice sector to do? My second question is related to that. One of the conversations that we have had with the advice sector around this is about the impact of stress on people's health and mental well-being, both their physical and mental health. And there has been in the past some resource available through health to help fund advice services around benefits and welfare in order to allow people to reduce stress and mental health conditions. But now that we are moving on to a programme for government which is about cross-cutting themes, to what degree have you discussed the impact of these changes in terms of mental health and well-being as they're rolled out, and how you provide the additional support that people will require? Because obviously, in terms of the programme for government objectives, wanting to see people feeling healthier and their mental health improved, this will have a significant impact on people, particularly, as I say, claimants who have complex needs.
Okay, so if we go back to the question about the advice sector, in terms of the Department for Social Development, over the last 3 years, didn't reduce any funding to the voluntary and community sector as part of its allocations for generalist advice through the community support programme, and also for the regional organisations, or sorry, for the community support programme. There was no reductions in voluntary and community sector funding. And in terms of where we are at the moment, the discussions we're having as part of the Everson report, and the executive committed to an additional £8 million for the advice sector over the next 4 years. And we're currently having conversations with both Advice NI, Citizens Advice Bureau and the Law Centre about putting in place a new service which will involve a free phone number for everyone to call in terms of advice, and direct referrals to local offices, and then regional services being available, support services. So there's a programme of work going on with the advice services about how they get that, and we're putting additional funding in to support them. We're also going to have a conversation as part of Universal Credit about where they need to change their services away from being administrative-based services to being one that's delivered digitally. Then how do we help them do that? So there's an active programme, and let me show you that, around working with the advice sector about how they help us, we help them manage this change, because we require an active and a vibrant voluntary and community sector and advice services to be available, because they're really an important part of the service. And so therefore it's in our interest as well to ensure that they're funded and they're providing the right type of services, and we're very active engagement with them.
Just to clarify, if I could, Chairman, my point isn't that you had cut their funding. My point is that their funding has reduced because their external funding resource has actually been lost over recent years, and it has led, for example, to a reduction in the number of advisors available in my own constituency over the last 5 or 6 years, and particularly over the last 2. So there are significant issues around the advice sector and the shrinkage in that sector, not directly related to what your department has done, but what has happened externally in terms of funding. And my concern would be that they will be expected to, if you like, deliver more, but overall will have less resource with which to do.
Well, we're trying to certainly supplement that resource and trying to ensure that all the resources that they're using we're being directed in the right direction, and that's part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, it's just to go back to it. My understanding was, and maybe you can clarify, that there was £8 million set aside for the advice sector to help with the smooth running of welfare reform. And was there not £2 million allocated recently to the sector. Now, one of the concerns that I have had in all that, I think it's excellent, that with a number of funding streams that have been given to the advice sector and other organisations, that it doesn't become additional, but other funding streams are reduced. Can we be assured that anything that goes to the advice sector in terms of money will be additional money on that, a way to reduce funding and all?
So in terms of this year, certainly the funding for the community sector, for the advice sector, has been maintained, and the money that was allocated recently in the spending review period and spent in monitoring review was additional money, and it's not being used to replace existing funding. It's being managed separately from that funding as part of the welfare reform and Fresh Start agreement, so it's being kept away altogether from the normal funding stream.
And has there been 2 million that recently?
That 2 million is this year's allocation out of the 8 million over the 4 years. And what happened was that the executive had made 501 million available for the mitigating schemes, but there was no funding for the advice sector recommendation, and the executive then made that available in June of this year.
And
so that money is now there.
The independent advice sector, will they be overseeing the distribution of the?
They will be providing, we will fund them, and then they will provide the services as a consequence.
Thank you.
Okay, well, look, thank you, Tommy, and thank you to your team. We look forward to seeing you on a very, very regular basis throughout the rest of the year.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, members, just wondering if you're content if we take item 9 before we take agenda item 8. The thinking there is that the outcome of the Savills report will inform the social housing reform programme. So if members are content, can we move to item 9? Okay, and I'll refer members to page 55 of their meeting packs. I will just invite the officials in for this session, please.
Sorry, serious?
Okay, can I please welcome Jim Wilkinson, Housing Director for Strategy, Policy and Reform, Paul Price, Social Housing Reform Programme Manager, Ronan O'Hara, Programme Asset Management Advisor, and Paul Ursherwood, Director of Asset Management, Northern Ireland Housing Executive, to the table, please. We have quite a hefty agenda today, so we're trying to keep the presentations to 30 minutes.
Okay.
And we're asking officials to be as succinct as possible so that we can get through the number of questions that we have with you. So if I could just invite you then to brief the members.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to brief the committee today on the Social Housing Reform Programme and on the Asset Commission. I'm joined today by my colleagues Paul Price from the Department, Paul Isherwood from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and Ronan O'Hara from the Strategic Investment Board. We intend to brief you firstly, if we could, on the findings of the Asset Commission. This was a fairly significant piece of work jointly commissioned by the Northern Ireland Housing Executive and the Department and taken forward by Savills, the appointed contractor, throughout 2014-2015. The Commission has provided a very strong evidence base to inform not only the work of the Social Housing Reform Programme but also the day-to-day work of the Housing Executive in efficiently and effectively managing its stock. All the key outputs from the Commission and a summary of its key findings were published by the Department of Social Development and NIHE in March 16 and are available on the relevant websites. By way of a very brief background, Savills were contracted by the then DSD and NIHE in July 14 to take forward a multi-element commission looking at the work and assets of NIHE with regard to its landlord function in particular. There were 4 themes to the various parts of the commission: the stock condition and investment requirements, by far the largest part of the commission, asset performance and evaluation, compliance and contract management. The published summary document, which was provided in your briefing, reflects essentially what Savills found and recommended in those 4 areas. Your briefing also contained a short slide pack, which, with your agreement, my colleagues will now talk you through. And I'd like to hand over to Paul Price.
Okay, the slide pack should have the Asset Management Commission publication of findings. The first slide largely repeats what Jim just said. It sets out the procurement arrangements behind the Commission and the themes that it looked at. So I won't repeat that in the interest of brevity. Go straight to the second slide, which is about the survey. So Savills conducted a survey of the housing executive stock. It looked at 25% of that stock, so around 22,000 surveys were conducted. And the findings broadly were that the stock generally meets minimum standards, but they found evidence of a lack of investment at the level that had been identified as required in a survey in 2009. And the effect of that really manifests itself in the end of this slide and the following slide. They found the next 30-year cost of investment, including repairs, was 6.7 billion. That's the big headline from the Commission, from the survey, sorry. 6.7 billion in order for the housing executive stock to be brought to and then maintained at a common standard. And that in particular had a front-loading profile to it, that investment requirement. 1.5 billion was needed over the next 5 years. Now, the detail underlying that headline is set out in the next slide. I'm talking about this slide here, this table, this matrix, which sets out the component parts of that 6.7 million. I won't go into detail on this slide, but if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the headline figure there, 6.7 million. All the numbers above it are the sub-requirements that comprise that grand total. What this really amounts to is, if you look in the second column from the left, that initial front-loaded requirement, the first 5 years, you see 1.5 billion needed at a rate, broadly speaking, of 300 million per year. So the immediate challenge for the next 5 years, the need to invest 300 million per year, when current income for the housing executive manages around 160, 170 million. That consists of requirements to replace kitchens, bathrooms, wiring, roofing. So it's the big stuff. The last slide I'm going to talk about here, which is this multicoloured one, it's not actually a finding from the stock, from this Asset Commission, but it puts its findings into perspective. You have there the two columns are the 2009 survey and the 2015 survey. What the 2015 survey is saying, and what this graph depicts, is this is how much deterioration there has been as a result of underinvestment against the findings of the 2009 survey. The question begged is the effect of similar, not reaching the investment requirements, those steep investment requirements of this 2015 survey over the next 5 years. But for the remainder of the Commission, Paul will take you through the next slides.
Okay. The element of the asset performance evaluation work of the Commission was to determine the performance of each of the housing executive assets. That was actually split into two areas. One was a financial area and one was a non-financial area. The financial area was looking at the NVP, which was the income and expenditure over the period of the Commission, and also the non-financial was looking at the sustainability of the stock. So the headlines coming out of that on the NVP side was that 44% of the stock had a negative NVP. This was equivalent to roughly 38,000 properties. 56% of the stock had a positive NVP, roughly about 49,000 of the properties. The performance has declined since the 2009 survey. In the 2009 survey, the average NVP per property was £2,500 per property. As of 2015, this has actually fallen to just £128 per property. And this is weak compared with other landlords. If you go over the page, this gives us the NVP range, the overall range. And as you can see, this is a tornado graph just giving us the details of the performing stock. In the top right-hand corner, you can see 49,000 units are making a contribution of 305 million to the portfolio, but 37,000 units there are given as a negative 293 against the portfolio. So overall, in 87,000 units, we only have 11.2 million positive NVP across all of the properties. Of that 293 million, 93 million are equated to 1,600 units, which are the 32 tower blocks at 1.9% of the stock. 80 million of that is also about 9,000 non-trad properties. Over the page, we go on to the outputs of the asset catalogue, the compliance and the contract review. The asset catalogue was actually an element of the Commission just to identify all of the built property assets. We had them over a number of IT systems, and now that has been consolidated into one asset register now. Compliance. The compliance side was looking at all of the statutory compliance functions that the Housing Executive had to undertake, looking at gas, electricity, Legionella, fire, etc. There was a lack of consistency regarding policy and process, procedure and performance management, and a clear lack of accountability in the majority of these compliance areas, and as a result of that we've formulated an action plan which we're currently working through. Element 5, under contracts, undertook a review of all the contracts of the Housing Executive. Arrangements were broadly fit for purpose and areas where existing practice could be improved in those recommendations, and we've taken them forward into our new procurement practices.
The last two slides really are just setting out what we're going to do about all this, and very briefly, I'll set out the Department's response to the survey's findings. So that big investment requirement of 6.7 billion, what are we going to do about it? The social housing reform programme is essentially what the Department is going to do about it. And we are going to brief you about that in a second, but very briefly, and these are the findings that were set out by Minister Morrow just before, in the last mandate, just towards the end of the last mandate, in a statement he made to the Assembly. The findings are that the challenge posed by that 6.7 billion are that the Housing Executive needs to generate increased rental income and, in addition to that, raise additional capital finance, either through some radical realignment of capital priorities or through borrowing. And what the programme is looking at is arrangements, structures that allow those kinds of options to be delivered. And it hopes to reach conclusion in this mandate. On the other matters, Paul can respond.
Just on response to the findings from the side of the Housing Executive, asset management strategy and associated tower block strategy has been formulated as a result of the works from the Commission, and that was approved by the Board and the Minister early in 2016. We're currently working on a 10-year investment plan to address the investment required, and obviously that will be subject to funding. Compliance action plan, that's been formulated, and we're currently working through rewriting all of the policies, procedures, actions, and we're halfway through that at this moment in time. Procurement and contract management arrangements, we've made some changes following some of the recommendations within the contract review, and those have actually just been some of those have actually just been implemented into our new response maintenance contracts as well. Asset management IT system, as part of the works as well, is we have all this stock condition survey data, and we've just procured a new asset management system called Keystone, and we're just currently implementing that, so all of the data can actually be transferred into that and managed going forward. And one of the key areas, I joined the organisation 12 months ago as the new Director of Asset Management, and we're just currently going through a restructuring programme to go through the new methods of working as well to implement a number of these recommendations.
Chair, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you,
Chair, just a couple of questions. One, back in 2009, I think the origin was probably back in 2008, but when Margaret Ritchie was the Minister here, and I spoke to yourself, Jim, about it a couple of weeks ago. But the root of the problems that we face now may lie there, because I think that Savills were fairly critical then, while commending the Housing Executive for the high level of maintenance that they'd done their houses, they were critical that and the likes of multi-element that it may not have been required, and from that I think there was a reduction in the amount of money available for maintenance and a reduction in how the time progressed. So a lot of the problems that we face now could probably be traced back to then. It actually seems strange that the same organisation that we had back in 2009 that spoke about the over-maintenance of properties are now saying that it has led to that we need to invest heavily in it. You know, can we rely on the likes of Savills, which is obviously a renowned organisation and thing, that said something back in 2009 that obviously has consequences today?
And I'll pass on to Ron to say a bit about the detail of how the survey is taken forward and the importance of it. But I think, the 2009 survey, which we did pick up, did indicate that NIHE needed to take forward a level of investment more than they were investing at that time. The bit that you're mentioning about critical was actually more critical of the approach to how they do that maintenance rather than the actual amount of maintenance that had to be done. And certainly, I know Paul and Ron are more expert than I in terms of the best approach to doing that maintenance. But I think Savills commissions have both been fairly consistent that there is a required level of maintenance that is in excess of the funding that's available to do it in order to maintain stock at a good standard. At that stage, they were recommending, I think, a maintenance programme of in excess of 200 million per annum. It's now gone up to 300. The biggest issue from 2009 to 2015 has been the availability of funding. for maintenance. NIHE funds its entire maintenance programme, by and large, from rents. Prior to 2008, it also had an income stream from house sales. But as we all know, 2009 was a dramatic decrease in house sales, and therefore a massive reduction in the amount of capital funding that was available to the housing executive. And from then moving forward, it's been a balancing act between capital budget that we have for the new build or capital to an existing stock. And that existing stock has been the rent approach.
I understand. I mean, there is actually a good summary document of the survey, reasonable length to absorb, and its key messages are stressed in there. And actually, many of those do stress the consistency of message between the 2009 and 2015 survey, i.e., that a certain level of investment was identified in 2009, it was not invested, and the results are now as follows.
Maybe Ronan could say something a bit about this particular.
But see, just on that, Chairman, and the point that I'm trying to make, and I'm just looking at some of the questions that were asked back in 2009, and Margaret Ritchie, a question that the survey shows that work undertaken and its properties has been of a high quality, but Savills indicated that there needed to be a fresh look at the maintenance strategy. Now, if you're delivering work at a high quality, but then say that you needed a fresh look at it, has to have an impact on the thing. And I remember at the time that there was talk of money being moved from maintenance into new build and other aspects of things. And at the time, there was people within the Assembly were saying that this had to have an impact on the quality of maintenance that was being offered across. I think that's a point that I'm trying to make. And the second point that I want to make was one of the questions that I raised back in 2009 was the whole question of conversions of rents and the impact that would have on people. And just some of the indication that's coming through now also seems to be that seems to be back in the agenda, and that is the increase in rents to meet the I take it that's the case.
Well, certainly. I mean, we'll cover that in the second part of the briefing as we talk about the reform programme, because rent is a key element of it. But yes, I mean, I think there's the point that all social landlords across UK and the Republic of Ireland focus primarily on rental income being both fair and affordable to the individual, but being enough to allow the landlord to invest in the properties so that tenants are living in a good, high standard home. And that is striking that balancing act. And our information would suggest that in the Northern Ireland context, relatively speaking, NIHE rents are lower than comparable other organisations and have been for quite some time. And that obviously cascades through to how much you have to invest.
It's true, but again, I would have to point out that we live in a fairly low-pay economy, where many of the people depend on housing benefit to supplement their rent, whether working or not. And any conversion of rent or increases in rents will have an impact on their ability to pay also. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that's the debate that needs to take place. And the point that I am making is that that we can dress it up whatever we want, that a company that near enough recommended, and they made it dress it up in different words, that we were over maintaining our properties, are now come back and saying that because of consequences of the last 7 or 8 years, that there needs to be major investment. Nobody's in any doubt that that's the case. But when you talk about the conversion of rents and you talk about the increase in rents, the very fact that I think it was over 40% of the properties that people live in and are paying rent for are not up to a standard that would warrant an increase in rent.
I said we'll try and cover some of that in the second. So it does get into it, but
yeah, the
third
actually got that forward, and it mentions in the report.
Maybe returning to kind of the very start of that dialogue. There's almost a question there about can we rely upon the findings arising from the 2009 survey and the subsequent survey in 2014. And I would be of the view that the professional advisors, whoever they are, can be relied upon. And it's not necessarily, it's irrelevant as it's Savills or some other large corporate organisation, because of the way it's commissioned, the challenge that's brought to bear by the client function, including the expertise within NIHE and the expertise within, at that point in time, DSD. And ultimately, Jim is right in highlighting that the 2009 report clearly indicates an investment need, forecasting ahead. And part of the issue today is we haven't managed to meet that need in the intervening period. So that's carrying forward and compounding our current dilemma.
I made my point, Chair, that I think any more debate and argument on it, that still the question remains that in 2009 that the Housing Executive recommended for the high quality maintenance and certainly in multi-element schemes. There's a different approach taken to that, and that has had to have a consequence on the conditions that exist, and we're paying the price of it now.
Thank you, Fra. You've made that very clear, whether you've got an answer or not. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the information. I just wonder what assessment is made in property sales. And apologies, new member of the committee. Was it included in terms of the Savills review? And in terms of, I mean, is that seen as a loss of a liability, therefore a kind of positive, or what are the sort of financial considerations around property sales?
In terms of the house sales scheme, I mean, it's a statutory scheme that's available to tenants to purchase properties. To purchase their social home, should they want to, and it encompasses a discount, etc. So it's a statutory right that individuals have. In terms of how NIHE consider it, because it's a statutory right, they have to respond to it, but what they do look at it is what it means for their balance sheet, either both a capital receipt but also a reduction in stock. So that's how it's accounted for. I would say, and Paul will probably confirm this, house sales are much, they're really, it's a couple of hundred, as opposed to a time when there was over 200,000 stock, and there's 8,000. So they really are not a major feature, either of outflow of stock or of capital receipt coming in.
At the minute.
At the minute. Yeah.
I don't know, do you have anything?
No.
And if we're looking at this, you know, if we look at the 1.5 billion figure, we're transferring stock obviously to primary ownership, and I appreciate it. It's small numbers at this point, but if we're seeing each of those properties almost as we have this liability in terms of bringing up the standard, are we essentially through sales transferring a liability over to private ownership?
On the private, if someone purchases the property, the sale price will reflect the condition of the property, and it will become their responsibility. But ultimately, this survey is not looking at that. It's looking at what we need to do to make all these 88,000 homes up to a very good standard for the tenants that live in them. And obviously, with all the challenges in the waiting list in relation to social homes, our aim is always to try and increase the total quantity of social homes that are available. But the house sales scheme sits alongside that.
Is that scheme being reviewed?
Yeah, it's been reviewed. We started the review in the last mandate. That review is nearly coming to a conclusion, and it's something we'll be presenting to the Minister and then onward from that.
Okay, excellent.
It has been reviewed in England, Scotland and Wales as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm mindful that this discussion is very much connected to the agenda item 8 as we have it on the social housing reform programme. So could I ask Jim and one of the Pauls to remain and invite Grace McGuinness, Structures Project Manager, and Heloise Brown, Rent Project Manager, to brief the committee and open it up for discussion?
See, and it's just one of the things, because I don't know where the house sales scheme will come up in the next presentation, but it's certainly a valid point that whilst new build continues to provide additional houses, not enough getting built, but for people, I think the most real answer is by housing providers is the whole question of relets, and with the continued sale of houses, it hits at the ability of housing providers to and there has to be, and it's just interesting that Jim was saying that about there's a review. We need to be moving to a stage where there is a full suspension of the house sales scheme to try and deal with the serious problem that we have in waiting lists.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, is that the house sales scheme to owners?
Right to buy.
Right to buy?
Yeah.
Well, surely if you take somebody off in terms of the right to buy, there's an automatic gain there as well, isn't there?
No, it's not. You have to build a house for every one you sell to try and replenish the stock. And most of the people that are on waiting lists rely on a housing sale, so a house sold is a house lost. And I think the vast a big number of people who bought the houses back from, say, 2007, 2006 onwards, have eventually sold their houses at a huge profit. And so that all needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking at it. Now, if you were saying that for every house sold, that we're going to build a house to replace it, that may be well and good. But we have a duty and an obligation to look after the most vulnerable in society. Many of them are sitting on waiting lists at the present or lying at hostels.
Yeah, no, I accept that, and that's why I was very supportive of the different proposals, such as the European Investment Bank and others. But it just wouldn't be an agreed view across the committee that we're going to stop, because I think people should be, and particularly people who have paid for long periods of time of their lives and through their own social circumstances were not in a position they could even get on the property ladder. To deny those people decades later the opportunity to right to buy would be something you wouldn't find support from.
Certainly, I think it's going to be an item that will be discussed as we go forward, so we'll have ample opportunity to express our own views, our party views and a committee view, I'm sure, if we can reach one. Yeah. Okay, so item 8 then, we just change over, and can I thank the officials that presented to us, Paul and Ronan, and invite Grace and Heloise to the committee table, please.
As you mentioned, these items are quite linked, so yeah, I'm confident if someone didn't ask the question, it'll be answered here when they come across.
Thank you. Okay, so over to you guys.
So we can turn now to the Social Housing Reform Programme, and again by way of a very brief background. This was formally launched in January 2013, a mandate provided by the then executive to explore options for change in both social housing delivery structures and related policy arrangements, effectively the operating system for social housing. But that also followed about 10 years of research and reports that highlighted the need for change in a number of areas, not least to do with that building up of investment requirements. In February 2014, the programme presented its initial research into how housing systems and structures had evolved across the UK, ROI and other areas of Europe to the then Social Development Committee. Since then, the programme has been developing its earlier research and exploration into specific proposals for both structural reform and policy reform. It's done this by advancing 2 distinct projects: a policy project, which has developed proposals for the social housing policy reform, effectively, as I said, the operating system for social housing providers, and a structural project looking at possible options for social housing structures that can meet the significant delivery challenges we currently face, not least the investment requirement that Savills stock conditions surveyed real, but also more increasingly social housing providers have a major role in terms of community cohesion, in terms of helping into work, in terms of monetary devices. So it's an expanding remit. So if I turn firstly to the policy project, we've developed and consulted on during the last mandate policy proposals for tenant participation and a new regulatory framework, and implementation on both those is underway. The policies project is also continuing to develop proposals with regard to social housing rents. Rent policy proposals were presented to the Social Development Committee a year ago. However, the planned consultation did not proceed. The proposed policy at that time, among other things, suggested that there should be a benchmark rent for the average social home. Not a target, but a benchmark to which there should be some consideration, and that should be reviewed every year. And NIHE rents, which were considerably lower than those charged by other social housing providers, should gradually, over a significantly long period of time, rise towards that benchmark to bring an element of commonality. It should be over a period of time to address the very facts that only once your home is at a good standard should you be expected to pay significantly for it. And the benchmark rent was designed to provide both affordability for tenants and financial sustainability for landlords, allowing them to make the necessary investment to maintain high-quality stock for the benefit of their tenants. However, the planned consultation was halted following UK Government's summer budget. This included a commitment to reduce rents in social housing in England over the 4 years from April 2006 as part of UK Government's policy reducing housing benefit costs. That was in the context of 13 years of rent increases towards a similar convergence theory in England. In that context, it's been necessary for us to reflect on the relationship between UK housing benefit changes and welfare policy and devolved social housing policy before advancing these proposals any further. And that work is ongoing with our colleagues in the Department of Finance. Finally, in terms of policy, we were also examining the arrangements for engagement between local government and housing taking account of recent changes in terms of local government structures, but also remit, and any change that might be taken forward in relation to social housing structures in terms of the structural element of the programme. The Structures Project, which is effectively looking at how housing functions of the Department and Northern Ireland Housing Executive, is being taken forward through, again, a business case process that's seeking to identify and assess the best options for delivery. And as with all business cases, this includes do nothing option. An initial outline business case was concluded in June 15, but again, it needed to be paused as we reflect on significant changes, not least the idea of rental income, but also the Office of National Statistics review into housing associations and their status. And finally, the Fresh Start Agreement, which also asked us to look critically at social housing in a way that we could reduce pressures on departmental expenditure limits. This revision has meant that we've split the initial business case into two. One is being prepared now being prepared for consideration by the new Minister and, if appropriate, the Executive. In essence, the questions that these business cases are being asked to come up with are what is the most effective structure to support the delivery of the landlord services of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, ensuring that including that it can secure the necessary investment in its homes? And secondly, what is the most efficient and cost-effective way of delivering regional housing functions, such as the Common Selection Scheme, Supporting People Scheme, landlord registration, etc., that are carried out joint between the Housing Executive, Regional Service Body and the Department? To give you a wee bit more detail on both. Firstly, turning to the landlord business case. In our earlier briefing session on Savills, we identified a 30-year investment requirement of £6.7 billion to maintain homes to a good standard that would be common across social landlords, with a significant upfront investment required to address a backlog of investment that is needed. The landlord business case is considering options on how that investment might be secured. Unsurprisingly, most of the options centre on how can borrowing be levered in, because, as Fred pointed out, you want to lever in borrowing, do up the properties, and then have a suitable rent, as opposed to a suitable rent paying for it. But it's also about the more than bricks and mortar. It's looking at how a landlord can play a role in terms of employability, working with its tenants in terms of issues such as debt management, all of the things that a modern landlord would be doing. As had previously been agreed with the then Social Development Committee, options range from do nothing, full public ownership, transfer of some stock to housing association sector, or a full transfer of stock. That's the broad map of all that we're considering. Effectively turning the Housing Executive into a large Northern Ireland Housing Association. Turning to the regional functions and programmes, which we refer to as non-landlord business case, this is looking and considering how the functions of the Regional Housing Authority, half of the Housing Executive, and those of the Department for Communities Housing Group could be delivered in the future, and what would be the most cost-effective way of doing that. Currently, those functions between the two bodies cost about £40 million to administer, so it's looking at, is there any way of doing that in a more cost-effective way? And possible options are being identified and assessed, and we're also seeking to maintain the scope of service delivery and outcomes for stakeholders. That's at a slightly earlier stage than the other element. Hopefully this brief overview has been helpful, and my colleagues and I would now be more than happy to take any questions the committee might have.
Okay, open to members. Can I just ask, just for clarity, it's in there, and again, I'm new to the committee, so I'm trying to bring myself up to speed with everything that's gone before. But it was saying that there was 10 years of research.
Yes.
And then we are still researching, although we're trying to formulate some proposals. Can I ask why that's taken so long?
I suppose the main reason it's taken so long is there's 10 years of various reports saying there are significant challenges and real problems facing social housing structures, not least driven by the need to invest and the fact that there's been significant reform across other parts of the UK and ROI. From 2014, what we've been doing is not research into what are the problems, we've been doing research into what are the solutions. And those options, clearly this is a very important matter, it requires agreement and executive approval. So our authority in 2014 was to explore options for addressing the issues. And in that way, we've been bringing those proposals forward, first from a policy context, and more recently we'll be bringing it forward from a structural context. As in all these things, as some of the solutions that we were beginning to come to the fore, systems change, and we've got to reflect on what those changes might mean, such as rent policies, such as structural changes, such as the Fresh Start Agreement. But the reason it's taken that is because it'll require agreement to deliver those solutions, and the environment has changed. But certainly from 14, it's not been about research of what the problem is, it's about research of what the solutions might be.
Okay. Brad?
Sure, it's just, I have to say, I've been on this committee for quite a while, and a lot of the work on the social housing reform programme that the department done has to be commended, and it's tried to generate the debate, and in many ways the delay has more political delay than departmental delay. I know that myself and Jim and others may debate what the final outcome, but I certainly wouldn't question the commitment of the department trying to bring it. So I think we need to get our act together on how the thing, because it has a direct impact on the housing structures that are already out there. It has an impact on morale, it has an impact on delivery, and I think that we need to get our act together on how we move this thing forward.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again. There was an asset transfer in Bangor to Oakley Housing, and I recall there was a similar scheme in the West previous to that. What assessment has been made of that, and what are...
Well, I mean, it's a small scale. In parallel with this programme, there's a thing called a small scale stock transfer programme, where NIHE were asked to identify 2,000 homes where they wouldn't have had the wherewithal to deliver investment, and to see if that investment could be levered in using the housing association sector. So it wasn't about changing the structure of the housing sector, it was about testing that approach. There's been evaluations done on both of those. Obviously, they were carried out by the housing executive, and we can share those with the committee. Certainly the first one, which was in Rinmore. And those evaluations have indicated that the level of investment was delivered. The properties were brought up to the standards, and the conditions of the transfer were met. One of those conditions of transfer was that the tenants had to vote for it. So the housing executive couldn't just transfer the stock.
Although, if I can be rude enough to stop you, they were told, and if you don't transfer, you'll never see these improvements. So there was, of course, a choice, but
there was a choice,
a fairly stark choice.
And I think as well, I mean, in that choice, the association has to give full indication to the individual tenants what this transfer will mean in terms of rent levels. But the two that have happened have been voted for by tenants, and there's now a programme for another 4, and they'll be coming forward over the period of time. Throughout each of those transfers, there's been lessons learned in terms of both approach to business case, in terms of the specification of properties required, but also in terms of the whole idea of how you work with tenants and how you get that information across. In terms of the social housing reform programme, if you were to go down the big route, it would be the same approach. Tenants would have to vote for it, and they'd have to be told effectively what is going to be done, what is the commitment that's made in terms of this change. So that would be the common approach. But these are a separate, small-scale programme, 2 done, and I think another 4 or 5 to go. But I can certainly provide the committee with a schedule and timetable in relation to that, and any reports that have been done.
Okay. In terms of, I suppose, options for bringing in capital, you mentioned, you can either move capital funds around within government and prioritise housing, or through borrowing. Going back to when Margaret Ritchie was Minister, certainly when I first heard the talk of a developer contribution. Has that ever been revisited? Has there ever been any progress on that?
We issued a consultation paper last year on developer contributions. That's slightly different. Developer contributions is towards a new build, and we issued the then Minister issued a joint consultation with the Minister for the Environment on developer contributions. In terms of the industry response, they asked that a more significant regulatory impact assessment be taking place in terms of, really the challenge was, you can only get a developer contribution if the net impact of the cost of development produces a profit, and you can get an element of a profit. And it's to do a lot with the construction sector and house prices in Northern Ireland, that a lot of areas build land and sale weren't adding up to a profit. But that work has been done, a policy exists, and we will be revisiting that with, again, with our own Minister and the Minister for Infrastructure. There was broad support, but obviously there was a bit of a challenge as to when's the right time to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just ask, in terms of provision of social housing, and this aspect is a small bit player in a solution, but it's around special acquisition. It is a big issue for people who have particularly complex physical needs and disabilities, and because of the shortage of provision of either suitable or adaptable accommodation in both the social and private rented sector. Can I get your assessment of how the department thinks that special acquisition is working as part of the solution?
Well, certainly, I mean, the department with the Housing Executive has done quite a significant amount of work on adaptations and the provision of specialist accommodation. One element of that was by trying to get a catalogue of what has the investment already made, what investment have we already made, where are adapted properties, can they be better managed to meet needs. The preferred solution to address someone's access problems if they want to enter the social home as opposed to a private adaptation is either to find a suitable existing home, adapt a social home, or have a housing association provide a new build social home. In some exceptional circumstances, the best approach is to purchase an existing property, but it will fall into the ownership of a housing association as a landlord who will either do whatever is required and do it. But that would be the end of the scheme. We'd try all the other options first. So that's quite a costly outcome to meet the need, but it will, if that's required, that's what will happen.
It's just that, you know, a number of us will probably have cases where you have exhausted every avenue and then you're only presented with the certainty of a new build, which is 2, 3, 4 years away. And really the only option is around the special acquisition. But when you look at the affordability envelope, it really is realistically a non-starter.
It could be very, I mean, that's why I said it would come towards the end. New build, I mean, associations will, you know, I've known associations respond very quickly to a particular need, and they can try and turn around a new build as quick as they can, and sometimes it's better if they can do that because it will be within a development, and it'll be, rather than an isolated purchase, it'll be a development to help the individual meet their needs within a community setting. The special purchase, it is about business cases, and they do have to add up and make economic sense, and it is, I mean, certainly they're some of the most challenging cases that we deal with, and we have, obviously the outcome is supposed to be the best outcome for the tenant, and we try and achieve it, but it does have to go down the business case route. And
as part of looking at this situation and looking at resolutions, will that be an aspect that is reviewed, the special acquisition?
Well, what I said, we have carried out a review. I mean, we carried out a review of the Supporting People programme. We also carried out a review of the adaptations, and there's now an action plan. Now, by far the bulk of adaptations are either done in an individual's home with the advice of an occupational therapist, or it's going down the new build route. And in that context, they are looking at how do you speed the process up, and how do you get a quicker outcome. So that will be part of that adaptations review.
Okay. Okay, no other members have indicated that they... Jonathan,
sorry. No, I hadn't indicated. The question of borrowing seems to be critical. I don't think any of us want to oversee a situation which we seem to have, and it's no blaming the Housing Executive. They have to work within the structures that they're given. But I get the impression, it's only impression, that we're sort of presiding over the decline, generally speaking, of the Housing Executive for a lot of reasons. What is the position in borrowing and thinking outside the box to allow the Housing Executive?
I said we haven't reached. That's our question, and I said we're focusing on solutions. There's a solution that says the Housing Executive as a public body has the authority to borrow, but doesn't have it's in all part of the Northern Ireland budget, and therefore there's no scope to cover. There's an option which would be an option that you've seen in England, which would say, well, we will make our council housing a housing association. So you'll change its status to a housing association. All the tenants will vote to be part of that housing association. All the staff will transfer to the housing association. It's not a public body, so it borrows. Or there are all variety of options. So we're trying to explore what's the best way to get an upfront capital injection. Because the Housing Executive, the wherewithal, the service of borrowing is there because it's rents. You know, it's just about, and also smooths out that whole how fast you put rents up because it's about borrowing. But we would see that as being the key solution. So the options are ranging from find more capital money within the government. That's a challenge. Everywhere has capital pressures, and not least even if we look at the housing budget ourselves, we've said the Housing Executive would need to invest about 300 million a year. They've currently invested about 170 million. We ourselves spend about 130 million on capital programmes in housing. from new build to affordable warmth. You know, there's a call there. Do you put it all in? That would make the cover up, or borrowing. And we're exploring, can it borrow within the private sector or within the public sector? Can it have the wherewithal to repay it? If it can't borrow, what structural change would allow it to borrow? So those are all being explored, but certainly from the level of investments that are required and the time we needed, we think realistically the only access to a large injection of capital would be through borrowing, either public or private.
Well, just finally, on that, have we a time frame for when those explorations will be concluded and advice given to the committee?
The two things, we had sort of come to certain conclusions with preferred options to put to ministers and ultimately for consideration last June. The two things that changed that we had to reflect on were, one, what is the assumption you should be making about rent trajectories given changes in England, and what would that mean to borrowing? And secondly, because one of the options being considered was the whole area of the housing association or voluntary sector, what is the status of housing associations? So we have to conclude that. We have to finalise our understanding of those trajectories and then allow us to present solutions. We would anticipate that the answer to both those questions in terms of what it means would be clear to us in the autumn, and that's when we'd be focusing on bringing back some proposals.
Sure.
Okay, can I thank you? Thank you for your briefing and for responding to our questions. Members, we'll take your views on this. I was going to suggest that we suspend for a short while for lunch, or if you want, you can press on ahead. It's entirely your call. We have one more briefing on homelessness, but then we have correspondence and our forward work programme. So how do members feel?
Chair, I would prefer we pressed on if others have no objection.
Yeah. Okay with that?
Are officials here?
Just checking. Chair.
Okay. Yeah, even if we take like a 10-minute just break there to get coffees and restrooms, wait on our...
I think generally, Chair, if we're going over sort of 2 hours and meet, I think it's good practice to take a 5-minute and make sure we're still giving our best to these people who take the time.
Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break then.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29.
Okay, thank you, members. So we're moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is an update on homelessness. And this will be a joint briefing by the Department for Communities and homeless organisations. Members may want to refer to page 78 of their meeting pack. And also just to take this opportunity to remind members that the Simon community is hosting an event at 12 p.m. next Thursday, because I know a number of members are very keen to attend that. So if I could invite the following witnesses to our meeting. Stephen Martin, Deputy Director of Housing Policy Delivery for the Department for Communities. Liam Kinney, Homelessness Service Manager from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. Ricky Rowledge, OBE, Chief Executive Council for the Homeless Northern Ireland. Carrie Anthony, Chief Executive Officer from DePaul, Ireland. And Sandra Moore, Director of Homelessness in the Welcome Organisation. Before I invite you to address the committee, could we just take this opportunity to congratulate you, Ricky, on a very well-deserved recognition through an OBE. Yes. Congratulations. Okay, so if you want to begin your briefing, we're trying to keep it to about 30 minutes because we've had such a hefty agenda today. So if you could keep your presentation succinct as possible, and then that'll give us the opportunity to ask you all of our questions.
Okay, great.
Okay,
thank you, Chair. Liam and I will be fairly brief, but we'll just set the context and then hand over to our colleagues from the voluntary sector. So really, in terms of the policy context, the Housing Executive has certain statutory responsibilities for homelessness set out in the Housing Northern Ireland Order in 1988, and we can by all means go into those if the committee feel appropriate, but just to suffice it to say there's a clear statutory framework. Part of the Housing Executive's responsibilities is that it has a duty to produce a homelessness strategy every 5 years. The current strategy is in its final year, and Liam will touch a little bit on that. And the Housing Executive is currently working, in the early stages of working on a new strategy which will be ready for April next year. When we were last at the committee, the five of us, we were here primarily, the Social Development Committee rather, we were here to talk about rough sleeping issues in Belfast. That was back in March, I think. Following that meeting, Minister Morrow chaired an inter-ministerial meeting that David Ford attended and representatives from the Department of Health. Following on from that, I think the committee has a copy of the action plan. The executive agreed a 12-point action plan to address the issues raised. All of the actions that were due to be completed by the end of June have been completed, and good progress has been made on all of the other actions, and we're very happy to answer questions about those. I'll just hand over to Liam.
Thank you. The homelessness strategy, currently 2012 to 2017, was reprioritised in 2014 and sets out the NIH's vision for tackling homelessness. There's four main objectives. The first is to place homeless prevention at the forefront of service delivery. Some brief examples of how we're progressing. That's the introduction of a comprehensive housing options approach, which is a redesign of our frontline services, which is aimed at giving a better choice to homeless people who come to us for help and provide them with sustainable housing solutions. We also fund the Housing Rights Service to provide free, independent, comprehensive housing advice throughout Northern Ireland. The second objective is to reduce the length of time households experience homelessness by improving access to affordable housing. In doing this, we've procured a private rented sector access scheme which provides housing opportunities to the private rented sector for homeless people, and to date has created 464 new tenancies and sustained 259 others. We've reduced the average length of stay in temporary accommodation at the start of strategy 2012 from 46 weeks to 37 weeks at the moment. The third objective is to remove the need to sleep rough. Some of the progress in this area, we funded the Paul organisation, and you'll hear Kerry about this, about providing a housing first approach which moves chronic homeless people into independent living with intense wraparound support. We also fund the Welcome Centre for street outreach, and we completed a street needs audit in Belfast last year, which give us up-to-date needs analysis on who was on the streets and will inform future strategies and improvement in services. The final objective is to improve services to vulnerable homeless households. We do this in many ways, but some examples are we fund the Housing Rights Service to provide housing advice to prisoners leaving the various DOJ institutions in Northern Ireland, and also we help fund the Women's Aid 24/7 domestic helpline. Stephen said there's a legislative duty to produce a new homeless strategy by April 2017. Work has begun on this task with the evaluation of the current strategy currently being undertaken, and an interagency consultative forum established to ensure departmental and sectoral input through its development. I'll skip over the Ministerial Action Plan and save that for any questions you may have. You have a copy in your pack there. I thought it might be useful very briefly to have a look at homeless trends and ask some questions. Is homelessness increasing in Northern Ireland? Unlike mainland UK, where there's been significant increase in homelessness, the picture in Northern Ireland is much more stable, with 18,628 people presenting as homeless during 15-16, a decrease of 5% from the previous year and a decrease of 7.6% over the last 5 years. However, in saying that, 11,202 people were accepted as meeting the statutory test for homelessness last year, which represents a 1.7% increase from the previous year. This means that although less people are presenting as homeless, they are coming to us with increasing vulnerabilities, especially with regard to their health. In attempting to agree a sustainable housing solution for them, we must therefore address both their housing and their support needs. And this is why our current and future homeless strategies require to be cross-departmental. Who is presenting as homeless? Again, a stable picture. Between 50 and 55% have consistently been singles, and with 24% small families, the next grouping. What are the main reasons that people present as homeless? Again, a picture of stability. For the last 5 years, they have been those with accommodation where it's not reasonable for them to remain, particularly the elderly, those that experience sharing and family breakdown, and those of loss of rental accommodation. How many people are in temporary accommodation? There are currently almost 1,500 households in temporary accommodation, and we make about 3,000 placements every year. The temporary accommodation portfolio we use is a mixture of private sector properties and voluntary and housing executive hostels. What is spent on homeless, we spend 8.2 million on homeless services through the homelessness budget and a further 27 million through the supporting people budget. And in conclusion, I would advise that although those numbers presenting are decreasing and the number of rough sleepers relatively small, we still have considerable challenges ahead in tackling homelessness. And this can only be achieved with cross-sectoral and cross-departmental working together to deliver an integrated homeless strategy.
Okay, I think I'm up next. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting us along today, and that we really welcome the opportunity to speak to you. In fact, every time I come up the big 1 mile drive, I think we are so lucky that we have such access to our elected representatives. I'm just going to do some overarching remarks about homelessness in general, and then my colleagues will talk more about particulars from a more operational and experiential point of view. I suppose I'd like to start by saying that in general, the homelessness sector agrees with the current strategy and believe that it's a really good foundation for future strategies. And we feel very strongly that putting prevention at the heart of the strategy is the way forward and can only be the way forward. But I think we also have to echo what Liam has just said, in that all of you will know from your own experience in your constituency offices that when someone comes to you where their situation is such where they are in danger of losing their home or they have lost their home, the reasons why they have ended up in that position are very, very often not reasons primarily to do with housing. That there are multi-complex reasons why people become homeless, and that we are not really as a society doing our best to look at how we can join up and how we can identify risk early and how we can intervene early in order that people don't become homeless in the first place. Now, from a housing perspective, one of the best ways we believe to do this is through the housing options type approach. But we need to have options, and those housing options and housing-led options also are completely dependent upon other departments and other agencies and other disciplines being there to offer the kind of wraparound support, whether that be from financial advice right down to complex mental health support within the community. If we're going to tackle the problem, that's what we need to do. And I would say, from the sector's perspective, that while we can say it's great that our statistics are stable, our statistics are absolutely horrific. If we look where there are 18,000 households every year presenting as homeless, and that increasing percentages of those people are actually meeting the quite difficult hurdles in order to be accepted as full duty applicants, we're not doing something right. And I think that in the sector, we need to acknowledge that we have a part to play in how we streamline and become more effective. Not only cost effective, but more effective in the delivery of our services and how we move people on faster. But also we need a true commitment across all government departments that we will work together, and we have a joint civic responsibility to ensure that people don't become homeless. I think we believe within the sector that the new programme for government does give us a real opportunity in that it makes a commitment not only to joint departmental working, but a recognition of bringing in other agencies outside government and using that expertise and that knowledge in order to develop wraparound and holistic solutions to a number of issues. And I think also that that commitment towards outcomes is incredibly, incredibly valuable, and that needs for us to focus our minds in outcomes in terms of the new strategy. And I suppose that we do have structures in place at present that are cross-departmental. The most primary of those would be the Homeless Strategy Steering Group, which is interdepartmental and intersectoral. But I would say with the greatest respect, the wrong people are at that meeting. That while we have departmental representation from health and education and employment and criminal justice, the people who attend that meeting have no mandate to make any recommendations or to follow through on the redeployment of resources or to change policy and strategy within their departments. And we really need this, and perhaps the programme for government is a way forward in that. I think particularly the interface between ourselves and health needs to be looked at, and I know that my two colleagues will make this very, very obvious in their presentations, and I think that's why we were so disappointed when we came out of the interministerial meeting and virtually all the actions were directed towards housing again, when actually what we've been saying was housing in this particular issue wasn't the major issue. The major issue was in those other services that could support people to maintain a stable housing situation. And suppose, in conclusion, what I would ask of you, and I never come along here, sure I don't, without asking for something, is that you, in your in your area, and that the deeds with power that you have as being members of the Committee for Communities, could perhaps arrange for, in the first instance, your colleagues within the Committees for Health and Criminal Justice to take representation from the sector to look at how we can follow through on those aspirations of the programme for government to find joint solutions, so that we don't end up in the coming years with 18,000 households presenting as homeless.
Come next. Again, just to echo Ricky's thanks for having us here today. It's great to be able to have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about what has been happening. If you don't mind, I'm going to focus a little bit on what we've done since we were last here as well, and give you a little update on some of those actions. But just as a way of introduction, I know quite a few people here have been to our services before and know a little bit about DePaul, but we're a cross-border organisation. I've the privilege of spending half of the week in Dublin as well. So I suppose just to echo, we were talking before we came in about there's a lot that we're doing very well here, and there's a lot of challenges that we're facing in Dublin, and it's good to be able to contrast. I think at the outset, I again would echo what Ricky's saying in relation to the homelessness strategy. I genuinely believe, particularly in Belfast and in Northern Ireland as a whole, there really isn't a need to sleep rough, and I think that is something that we can absolutely deal with, and I think it's really important to let the committee know that. I think there's bigger challenges around the ongoing wider housing challenges and how we get access to affordable and accessible housing for people. But just to say, in the terms of rough sleeping, I think we've made good progress and there's much more that we can do. In terms of, just if you don't mind today, just focus on three areas. One on our begging campaign, which we recently launched as a collective, and also Stella Maris and Housing First, all of which have been mentioned in the Ministerial Action Plan previously. The begging campaign was launched on Monday of this week. It was a joint initiative between ourselves and the Welcome organisation, supported by the Policing and Community Safety Partnership, the PSNI, the Housing Executive and Belfast City Centre Management. Where this came from was in relation to the street audit that was undertaken again by Welcome organisation and ourselves last summer in partnership with the Housing Executive, and it was very clear that the numbers of people sleeping rough in the city centre were relatively low. Too many, but still relatively low. But there was a lot of other street activity going on within Belfast in relation to street drinking and begging. And obviously we've been really, really keen to stress throughout this campaign that we want people to not lose their compassion. Belfast and Northern Ireland as a whole is an enormously compassionate society, and we have seen people giving to those who are on the street. But this raises one of the issues that Ricky has touched on. What we're finding is a lot of the people that we're working with do have addiction issues and more complex needs, which Sandra will touch on in more detail. And with a lot of the people who are begging, they aren't actually rough sleeping, they are in accommodation of sorts and are coming onto the streets in relation to their addiction issues. And so we really want the public to understand that what we want to do is to get people into services and support. However, that does raise the challenge of pathways into treatment services and mental health services. And again, echoing what Ricky said, there is a gap really around how we deal with homelessness moving forward in relation to those complex needs. So the campaign's launched, and so far we seem to have relative support in relation to that, good support in relation to it, and we hope that that will help the public to understand more of what is happening on the streets. The PSNI statistics at the end of 2015, the last quarter of 2015, of 146 people arrested, only 4 people had no fixed abode. So we do know that a lot of people have access to accommodation, and actions in relation to begging are around more complex needs. Some of you in the room have been to visit Stella Maris. You'll know Stella Maris in the city centre is the project for people who have long-term alcohol addiction, and it is what would colloquially be known as a wet service. We would refer to it as a low-threshold service. I think over the last 10 years we've worked with well in excess of 200 people in Stella Maris. It's absolutely critical to the rough sleeper strategy in Belfast. Again, we work very closely with the Welcome organisation. What's key about Stella Maris as well is the central placement function that comes into Stella Maris. The people are placed through the Housing Executive, and that means the people who need access to the service, who most need access to the service, get access to the service. And I think there is a challenge for us as a sector about how we make sure that those people are presenting to the Housing Executive are getting into the right accommodation to meet their needs. And I think as a sector we have a challenge about how best we manage placements into services moving forward. Stella Maris, around about 3 years ago, I was distressed because people expected that Stella Maris was the end of life and the last chance for people. It had a reputation as being that's the place where you went to finish your time, really, and that, for me, is absolutely not what we should hope for and expect for anybody. A 23-bedroom hostel where people are living together isn't what we would want, and it's not in the best interest of people to live like that long term. So we did look to the Housing First model, which is an internationally recognised model, and we talked to the Housing Executive about the ability to pilot from Stella Maris a Housing First model. I'm pleased to say that the 18-month pilot that we did in partnership led to the programme becoming embedded, and we now run Housing First in Belfast and in Derry. Again, it's a collaborative approach. It's absolutely not a service that we could deliver on our own. We do it in partnership with the Welcome organisation and a range of other providers. And really, it breaks with the old view of people needing to be put into a hostel to be made accommodation ready, and instead flips that on its head and says if we put people into accommodation with wraparound supports in place, that's a much healthier way to approach this. The evaluation is due to be published very, very soon, and the indications coming from that are very positive in terms of the benefits, not only for service users, but the benefits to the public purse. So we're very pleased that the Housing First model is working well, and we do believe that that is scalable. Again, it does rely on a commitment of health supports going into people within the community, so again, stressing the need for that. So my message really today is more housing and more commitment from health to allow us to do what we can for the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Kerry. Sandra.
Okay, Welcome organisation obviously welcomes the opportunity to give evidence to the committee, and some of what I'm going to say actually reiterates and picks up on some of the points that have already been raised by other witnesses. In our experience, Welcome organisation currently helps about 1,400 persons in Belfast City every year. The people who present to us are generally those with the most complex of issues. Indeed, we did a quick snapshot of 400, which is a fairly high sample this week, of 400 of our presenters. 80% of those had drug and alcohol issues, and the majority of that 80% had dual diagnosis. The figures that Liam has given us showing that more presenters are being accepted as homeless and meet the criteria supports our assertion that the complexity of need presenting across the sector is much more complicated, and there are far more vulnerable people presenting as homeless. Since we met previously, yes, we have delivered on our action plan, and indeed there has been a cross-departmental ministerial meeting. But it's interesting that, again, it is health, or it's housing and the voluntary sector who have been primarily leading out on the action plan. At the grassroots level, we feel and see every day the frustration of us not being able to get to access the pathways into other services. As Kerry has said, the success to getting people off the street is that we provide a wrap-round service. Housing and accommodation cannot solve the issues alone. We face the issue of dealing with mental health every day. The pathway to getting someone into a mental health service is so complex. We do have services, there are not enough of them, and certainly in terms of dual diagnosis, there is so much discussion in and around who should take the lead on people with presenting with dual diagnosis that actually there is no progress being made in that issue at all. We find regularly that people need to be in real crisis before they can access service. And when I say real crisis, that means that they reach a situation where they have to be detained under Mental Health Act. That is not, I don't think that's the way to deliver services in the year 2016. In terms of dealing with drug and alcohol issues, it is no secret that there is a dearth of detox and rehab facilities right across the 6 counties. that wouldn't be so bad if we had simple pathways into prescribing facilities. At the end of last year, 31st of March 2015, there were 738 persons across Northern Ireland were receiving support from the prescribing teams. Only 2% of those people were in a hostile situation, which I think is a very clear indicator that people in the homelessness sector are being failed. Why are they being failed? Because of the lengthy assessment process and the complexity of the pathways. At the moment, for those who are able to meet the assessment criteria, and given the complexity of need that we're dealing with, is it realistic that someone is going to be able to conform for 4 months, attend appointments for 4 months before they reach the top of the referral process? I don't think so. One of our concerns would be that this access to prescribing is held by specialist teams across the north of Ireland. That's not the situation in other cities or indeed in the Republic, where the process is much more simple. I mean, 4 months to get to referral for substitute is actually not going to be achievable for our group. In London, someone can get a substitute prescription within anything between 2 hours and 2 days. In Dublin, it's a bit longer, can be run up to 4 weeks, unless you're deemed very vulnerable, that is, that you're pregnant. So actually, that would suggest that these long assessment processes that are currently in place in the north of Ireland are not actually necessary. As an organisation, Welcome delivers 6 services. We're best known for our day and night street outreach and our drop-in service. We are at the cold front of delivering homelessness services in Belfast. Our work is primarily in and around addressing homelessness issues, accessing accommodation, but we also deliver harm minimisation services and reduce the use programmes. But we are finding increasingly the barriers to accessing other services are frustrating our work. I reiterate what's been said about health. I have been to meetings where health has been representative, but the decision makers are not at the table. And if we are serious about addressing the issue of rough sleeping, homelessness, street drinking, begging, whatever, we need all of the departments at the table and those who have the power to make decisions and indeed hold public purse. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Before I open up for members to ask questions, can I just personally congratulate you on the campaign. It took bravery because it almost seems counterintuitive, but I think it's the right thing to do, and it's in the best interests of people who are on the street. So just personally, I want to say, well done on that, Brad.
Sure, and again, let's say I was here before the last Monday finished in Ghana briefing, probably at a very difficult time where there was a number of deaths on the streets, and even at that stage, all the organisations here and departments here were saying the same thing. There had been calls, and I think people needed to understand, and that's why communication is crucial in all this. That when people were called for the likes of City Council to open up its properties to allow people, and these people were saying that's the worst possible thing that you could do, because there's no controls. The professionalism that is required in terms of wraparound packages could not be delivered. So I think that we need to get rid of some of these myths that go on that just open up a building and letting people in. This is the solution to many of the problems that we have. And I have to commend them because I've been in their properties, and sometimes they do an excellent job, sometimes under difficult circumstances. And but it's always interesting, and I would like maybe to elaborate, because one of the difficulties that I've found is that people that have very serious and complex issues being housed in properties with no wraparound package at all, even the low housing associations would tell you that part of the thing is offering that service. How difficult is it for somebody getting into a home for the first time that has very complex issues and doesn't have the help and assistance to come out the other end of it? How widespread is that? And in terms of the departmental approach, and I'm talking about cross-departmental approach, and I know Ricky touched on the thing, how important is it for a cross-departmental approach to allow you and others to be able to deal with what can be a very, very difficult and traumatic experience, not only for the people that suffer from homelessness, but also the people that deliver the services.
Do you want me to say about the housing?
Yeah.
It is very difficult for people moving into accommodation for the first time, particularly if they do have complex needs. There's no doubt about that. And I think one of the challenges is the range of housing that we have available. I think the last time I was here, I'd spoken about talking to some of the housing associations about, because there's limited support that people are offered at times, about how do we develop some KPIs really around behaviours whereby people might be getting into trouble and difficulty and need more support. And we've been working around that and looking at the floating support models that are funded through the Supporting People programme to see if there's more that we can do around that, and ascertaining where people are low, medium and high support needs. So the Housing First programme is really focusing very, very much at the very difficult to engage. So you've been to Stella Maris and you've seen the client group there and some of the health and behavioural challenges that there can be at times. So that's very much around the wraparound support, and going back to the point around departmental support. You can't provide that wraparound support without focusing on health as well, because those people don't just have a housing need and they don't just have a budgeting need, they have chronic health needs as well. With the Housing First programme, internationally it's been recognised as taking people directly from the streets into housing. We had started this pilot and as it came into a permanent project, looking at people who were already engaged in services, the likes of our day centre Foylehaven in Derry, or the Welcome organisation here in Belfast, or in Stella Maris, and taking them where they were a little more stable into accommodation. Just to say to the committee, we have this week tried to do that directly with a young person who would have very chronic needs on the street, and taking her directly from the street into single-led accommodation. And that's not without its challenges, but we did get a package of care and support in place through a range of providers, and we would like to do more of that and make sure that we're able to target those very most in needs on our street in Belfast before we enter into the winter period again. So I think in terms of trying to answer your question, it's different per client group that we look at. Housing First is very much around that very chronic need group and putting a package of care in place for them. I think there are people who are living in housing executive accommodation, housing association accommodation, who for whatever reason are getting into difficulties as well, and we need to be very clear about what are the indicators we put in place to make sure we're able to recognise when that happens and put supports. I've got some ideas about what those indicators might be, but you know, we have been trying to talk to some of our colleagues around that, you know, and again, you know, floating support, I mean, I think we talked last time about, you know, the regional approach around this. We have a harm reduction team working in the Newry and Mourne area, and again, working with people in accommodation who are in dire need and going in at times and doing a very intensive piece of work for a period of time to get somebody more stable, and having the flexibility within services to do that on an ongoing basis. That one strike or 3 strikes and you're out doesn't work. We have to allow people to make mistakes and be given more chances.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Kerry touched on one of the things I wanted to say, which is about, and you touched on it as well, Fra, it's how we inform other agencies so that they recognise risk factors. And if we're looking at housing associations, I think there's a programme that could be done there around training their frontline staff so that they actually recognise this, and then they also know who they can go to in order to provide the kind of services that do support people in vulnerable situations. But what I will say is part of the homelessness strategy that we are working on collectively, and we haven't got that far, and we anticipate it will be part of the next strategy, is looking at a very comprehensive common assessment framework. And that common assessment framework should identify anyone who is coming through the doors of looking for social housing, that the needs that they have and those complex needs will be picked up at the very beginning of the process through housing options or whatever. And that in some ways then can make sure that people aren't ended up being dumped because they had the right number of points into social housing without all of those other supports put in place, and that hopefully through that sort of common assessment and comprehensive assessment and the housing options, that link will be made so that when somebody is housed, services will be there. And it all sounds a bit like a pipe dream, but that can only work if we do have the commitment from other agencies, whether those be community mental health teams, whether that be community nursing, whether that be all those other services on the ground, to be able to be there to provide that service in people's homes. But you're right, there are people who end up and they're just abandoned, and it causes not only problems for them but for local communities. And it's unacceptable.
Okay, Fra. Stephen.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for the presentation and the information. Some of you will know I worked in the homeless sector for 5 years before getting into politics full time, but I very much take the point about the need for particularly health, but also justice to be involved in this conversation. And from my memory, and I imagine not much has changed, people came to us because of addictions, health issue, mental health, a health issue. They'd come from care and hadn't been able to maintain placements again, the role of health. So I think you'll certainly get the support here for that cross-departmental working. What steps need to be taken? It sounds like we've already started the process, but the housing first approach, what are the steps that need to be taken to I suppose, fully implement that, to move away from, I suppose, our current structures, to I suppose, what the vision we have for future provision?
What I would say, housing first, it's really targeted at chronic homelessness. At the moment, housing-led approach, which would be more general homelessness, is aimed at moving people out of hostel-like accommodation into the community with support there. But housing first, and there are various models of housing first, is dealing with very entrenched individuals and chronic homeless. As Kerry said, we've just received an evaluation report that we're about to sign off. The preliminary findings are extremely positive. They link into Kerry's organisation's work in Belfast and Derry, Londonderry. The key thing I was looking for in the report is how many people were still there in sustained tenancies, having been through this, and that comes out well in the report. And we have to sign it off yet, but I'd be confident that we'd be looking to extend that approach in coming weeks and months. But it's for, as there are 11,000 odd people that are statutory homelessness. There are 19,000 that present as homelessness. We're focusing in today, I know, very much on that chronic entrenched group. And for them, housing first for many of them is certainly the way forward in its different forms. And we will identify needs right across Northern Ireland, and we will introduce that where the need advises that we should.
Okay, and then, excuse my ignorance, new on the committee and 10 years out of homelessness. The housing-led approach, then, how does it differ from housing first? So obviously, if it's looking at the people in temporary accommodation.
Well, it's dealing with all other aspects of homelessness. Obviously, when someone comes to the housing executive and presents us homeless, we have a legislative duty to make inquiries and perform 4 tests. Are they eligible? Are they homeless? Are they in priority need? Are they intentionally homeless? If they meet those tests, or even pending those decisions, we have a legislative duty to provide temporary accommodation for them, pending a permanent offer of accommodation, and store their personal belongings. Now, we traditionally, as I said, fulfil that by moving them into voluntary hostels, housing executive hostels, or private single lets. Certainly, a housing-led approach would mean that we would use that hostel-type accommodation much less and try and move them into permanent housing options with whatever degree of support they required. It wouldn't be as intense, maybe, as housing first, which deals with more chronic.
I suppose the point, just to add, Chair, on that is the homelessness strategy focuses on prevention. So where we can prevent, whether it's perhaps a mortgage repossession through the work that we fund with the Housing Rights Service, or whether it's through the Housing Executive. What we're trying to do is find a housing solution person that prevents, perhaps sustain their existing solution, if that's sustainable. So it's a range of things that we're trying to do, but it's focused primarily on prevention where prevention is possible.
I think through the Housing Executive, the Housing Solutions team in Belfast, which hopefully would be again ramped up on a more regional basis. I mean, even just from our own perspective going in, the energy that there is there, and there is very much an attitude of trying to make this a one-stop shop, and that's a different way of working, obviously, and trying to break down some of the level of bureaucracy, and as Stephen said, really focus on, as somebody presents an in-housing need or in housing stress, how do we, instead of them becoming homeless, make sure that doesn't happen. So there's a massive focus, and just, you know, from a sectoral point of view, looking into that team and working with them, it really is a very positive move in terms of taking that one-stop approach and seeing somebody at the outset with that worker following them right through, and rather than having to come back week after week after week trying to get a solution as soon as possible. And the challenge then is how do you scale that up across Northern Ireland, across different housing offices, you know.
I would say that you're quite right. The whole idea of that is setting someone up to succeed. The objective is to create a sustainable tenancy, be it prevented, be it social option or a private option. It has been piloted in Belfast, in the Causeway and South Down areas at the moment, and we hope to roll it in right across the organisation by the summer of next year.
Could I just touch perhaps briefly on the elephant in the room about all of this? And I think we definitely are progressing in the right direction. And I think that in order to try and prevent homelessness, we do have to, in the first instance, try and keep people housed where they are, unless there is particular risk to them. Because we have seen nothing yet, as they have in other parts of the United Kingdom, when all of welfare reform comes in. And this is going to, and I'm not being hysterical about this, we have seen a massive increase in people losing their homes on grounds of affordability as the first instance. So while we at the moment are seeing an increase of people with very complex needs, we need to be addressing those risk factors early and keeping them in their own housing, because we're going to have a whole cohort of people coming who are going to be potentially losing their homes because they literally can't afford the rent, whether that's because there's a big vast differential between what the local housing allowance is, even within social housing, and what rents are, or that people are becoming sanctioned, or people aren't, they aren't being able to meet the criteria of universal credit or whatever. And I'm not making a value judgment in this. What I'm saying is this is the reality of what has happened elsewhere. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, while we have a bit of breathing space, to be looking at ways where that big cohort of people with complex needs can be maintained in their accommodation or got into accommodation very quickly, so that we can then free up time within the Housing Solutions team, which is going to be an excellent, and this is going to be an excellent project and something we really need and that we will really value, to be looking at then that advocacy and mediation role with landlords and trying to maintain, and with benefits and making sure people access the right amount of money. And I don't think that we can, no matter whether we talk about strategies and whether we're talking about this very particular group of people with very high needs and how we support them, forget about potentially how we mitigate in keeping people in their houses who were going to have difficulty affording their homes.
Right. I think, sorry.
Sorry to pick up on what Ricky's saying. It's actually very difficult to plan for the future and the impact of welfare reform in a vacuum. At this stage, we still don't know what it's going to look like in terms of housing. We don't know what transitional funding arrangements are going to be, and we don't know how long they are going to be in place. So it's actually makes it very, very difficult for us at grassroots level and at strategic level to plan for the future when we don't, at this late stage, have that degree of intelligence.
I think just make the point in the back of what you've said, that I suppose we've got to start, if we're trying to prevent homelessness, by saying statutory agencies don't make people homeless. That's got to be a starting point.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
No, thank you very much for the presentation and for the work it's done. We will look forward to seeing the report on Housing First and seeing what we can do in terms of good practice. from that. I noticed in the top 3 reasons for homelessness, the leading one still appears to be accommodation not reasonable, and that has been constant. I think the top 3 reasons have been constant throughout. Are we satisfied? I always hesitate with anecdotal evidence, but people speak to me about Belfast and areas where could be useful for social housing. But the housing executive are saying, well, there's no identified need for social housing in that area because there are houses available. But the understanding is the houses that are available are of poor standard. So is there a possibility even that we're masking actually the true figure of homelessness?
Within the current strategy, there was a requirement to look at the potential for hidden homelessness, and there was a research produced in 2013 which looked at the European model for measuring it. Now, that research came out, independent research, that said that the actual methodology and tools we had for measuring homelessness at the minute were relatively good and would allow the development of appropriate strategies, where the European model wouldn't. Hidden homelessness is extremely difficult to measure. If you measure it by a concealed household, i.e. a second household living with a family that haven't come to us, how does one know whether they're actually homeless or they're quite happy living where they're living? And my approach to hidden homelessness, and it'll be reflected, I'm sure, in the new strategy, is if you know people that are sofa surfing or in houses, please get them to come to us so we can carry out that housing options interview, we can identify what their housing and support needs are, and we can agree a permanent housing solution for them. But you will hear some people, and they will say about the hidden homeless problem, there is no known methodological tool that I'm aware of that can actually measure that accurately. So the answer, as far as I'm concerned, has to be get them to come to us, we can identify their needs, and we can plan services for their help.
In terms of, I heard some good news earlier from the housing executive and welfare in terms of fraud. I mean, where do we stand in, or where do you view the situation in terms of fraud, i.e. people who are allegedly living together but keep a separate premises to maximise benefit uptake?
It's abhorrent. There are 39,000 people on our waiting list looking social housing. It's a valuable commodity, and we're doing all we can in our frontline service. We have a specialist fraud team that's been established to investigate where allegations are made that fraud is being caused, and they have been successful in gaining properties back from people that have been illegally subletting them. So we take it extremely seriously. I think it was the subject of a Public Accounts Committee report in the recent past, and we are continuing to investigate anything that we find of that nature.
Can you quantify that at all as to how successful the fraud team's been, or what do you estimate it to be?
I can't. I can get you the figures. I don't work in that area myself, but certainly I can get you the figures. They actually won an award at our annual conference in the last couple of months for the work that they've done the last year.
It's just, I'd like to understand, just from the committee to support you, is this just anecdotal that gets thrown up and masks the real problem? Or is this a very serious problem that we should be attracting resources to actually deal with? And I suppose just one final question, Chair. And in terms of the wraparound services, I often find, I worked a couple of decades in social work myself, but very frequently the services stop at 5 o'clock. Right? You want to come in there?
The key aspect of the Housing First team is that there is an emergency call-out. So because it is a wraparound support, and because the team is working in such a way that if there's a crisis they can be called out to step into it, and that's an absolute feature of the Housing First profile that we need to have, because obviously this client group in particular, say they relapse around alcohol and something happens and the tenancy looks like it's going to break down, we need to be able to step in quickly. When the Housing First team's involved, they get a package of care wrapped around that person, which comes from a range of service providers, and eventually, obviously, we'll step away to try to get more people into the Housing First programme. But after that, at that point, if anything starts to break down, the providers of the care package or the individual himself in the accommodation can contact the Housing First team in an emergency or crisis to step back in to get things back on track. And that's absolutely fundamental to the way the project works to make it work. But that's not across the board, that's just for the Housing First team, you know.
Yeah. In terms of welcome organisation services, we found that the traditional floating support model, which was generally 9 to 5, wasn't working for a specific client group. So in negotiation with Housing Executive and supporting people, our model is that we open from 8 o'clock in the morning, our drop-in centre, to 10 o'clock at night, which actually, and that's 365. And that actually provides a very, very good window for engagement. We find that people, because of their chaotic lifestyles, etc., didn't keep appointments. After 3-4 visits, as you say, 3-4 strikes and you're out. Yeah. So we actually developed the model where people would actually float into our building. But that's also complemented by our street outreach, which is on the street from 8 in the morning to 1 a.m. the next morning. So again, that team is accessible 17 hours a day, and we have for our clients a phone. They can ring our crisis accommodation at any time during the night, and also in support of the Housing First model. We would work in quite good partnership in that if someone is, and not only just in the Housing First, but with other agents, with other housing providers and support providers, in that if it's a particularly vulnerable person and they need a different model of service, we would work in partnership to deliver services. I mean, in terms of the example cited by Gary earlier about the young girl being placed on Friday. Over the weekend, I mean, our outreach team, they were aware that this was, she may or may not settle, but they were made aware that if she appears on the street, to bring her back to the accommodation. So, in partnership working, we actually, in Belfast, there is generally, for that group, there is access to services, but then we are dealing with people with quite complex needs who are particularly vulnerable.
But it's not all rosy in terms of access to mental health services. If somebody goes into a mental health crisis, for example, you're right in terms of things haven't changed, where in some areas it still is a 9 to 5 response.
I suppose I would like to say in general, Mr. Bell, that the two services we have here today are exemplary. And it's one of those areas that we recognise within the sector that we need to look, even if we're not looking outside housing, that still many organisations who deliver floating support still deliver floating support between 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And when most people fall into crisis, it tends to be in the evening and at the weekends. And I think that is something that we're looking at addressing in the new strategy, and also for the sector to self-examine and say, is this actually the best response? Should we be redirecting our services to those potential crisis times? Yes. It's trying to get social services and those other very specialist services for which housing isn't, it's not our profession, we're housing support providers, on board to recognise that there has to be a response that isn't just accident and emergency, because accident and emergency is absolutely and not cost effective for anybody, and it diverts actually accident and emergency services away from where it should be, dealing with accidents and emergencies. And so that's another part of a conversation I think that we need to have with ourselves within housing, but also with all those other agencies that we need in order to support people in the community.
Well, I'll not labour with the committee, Chair, but I do want to take a look. We're spending 35.5 million on homelessness services. And I do know, because in some of the past research, particularly young people who were homeless, their crisis times were after 5 o'clock, they were at the weekends and they were on bank holidays. But often, and I accept the need for pathways into mental health, but often in a crisis situation you didn't need an expert person to give you a diagnosis. You needed a floating support worker that could put the building blocks back in place for you. And in many cases that came from the community and the voluntary sector as opposed to the statutory sector. And I think we do need to look, if we are looking at a very cost-effective approach, because money will become tighter, are we spending that £35.5 million in the way that gives the best
And we're doing
outcome
that.
for homeless people?
Thank you, Jonathan. I just have a few questions as well. A lot of it's been touched on around the addiction and access to services. What I wanted to ask was around offenders who are released, because you have a window, and just to say, is there a time frame fitted in there in light of the fact that you need your support most when you come out, if you are to interrupt the kind of pattern of behaviour? Second is around females, particularly those who are most vulnerable battling addictions. Do we have enough accommodation in the first instance, or is there a need for additional provision? And then I just wanted to ask, it's very clear that there is, being diplomatic, a breakdown when it comes to the engagement with health and homelessness. And really what I wanted to ask was, do you feel that there would need to be a legislative requirement to get the kind of cooperation that is required? And would I be right in thinking that you have two asks in a way of this committee? One is being mindful that homelessness falls within our brief, but if we're being realistic about tackling it, we recognise it goes across others, so we should engage with the other committees, particularly around health and justice. And is your second ask then that in this homeless steering group that we need to look again, or encourage a look again at the membership on that, to ensure that the people who are there are at a level where they can take decisions? And then the last question is really for Stephen. Stephen, mindful of the fact that we're hearing here that there's extreme nervousness about the impact of welfare cuts on housing and homelessness, is the department looking at that, particularly as a piece of work to understand the actual impact and that aspect? Because I know there's been other pieces that have been done in certain aspects. There hasn't been one done specifically of the impact of welfare cuts on child poverty, although the department is engaged in that. So is it also engaged in looking at the impact specifically on the issue of housing and homelessness?
Perhaps if I start with the last one. What we're doing in terms of particularly supported accommodation, there's a current review underway in England around whether the LHA cap will apply to supported accommodation, and that has very significant impacts on the Supporting People programme, and could threaten the viability of some of the accommodation, whether for homeless people, people with disabilities, or older people. So what we are doing is we're in touch very closely with that work to make sure that we're cited as early as possible on any changes so that we can begin preparation. On the wider issues, I know Tommy O'Reilly was here this morning, and there's a lot of work going on in the department in terms of working age around mitigations and so on, and we're obviously plugged into that to make sure that, as far as possible, that our policy interventions around homelessness can reflect that. But obviously there are close conversations going on because the mitigations is within the control of the Executive and the Department for Communities. That's easy to do. The other bit around supported accommodation and the LHA cap is much harder because that's going on in England, but we're closely following that to make sure that we can do whatever we can here to be aware as early as possible.
So I suppose what I'm asking then, Stephen, is are we going to be aware of the impact when the impact hits, or are we going to have an idea of the impact before that?
In terms of the work that's going on in England,
no, here I mean, just
here,
yes,
but here, yeah, because we're working closely with our colleagues and Tommy's team around mitigations. Yes, there's a certain amount of sync in terms of, and I know Ricky's involved and some of our colleagues working with Tommy, so there are opportunities there to align things. In terms of the work in England, the LHA cap for supported accommodation, if they did decide to apply it, wouldn't come in immediately, so there would be a window of opportunity to try and do what we could, but there are quite serious ramifications if that comes in.
So basically we'll know when it's impacting upon people?
Well, no, we will know in advance. We'll know the decisions we understand we were talking to colleagues from the National Housing Federation yesterday, and they're working very closely with DWP and the Department for Communities and the Treasury. There's a decision due over the summer. Lord Freud is due to make an announcement, but the actual impact will not be for a couple of years yet. They won't introduce it for a couple of years, but the decisions will be made, we understand, in the next couple of months.
Okay. And just with the other questions then, people can remember them.
May I comment just on the offenders? Two things. Firstly, I'd mentioned we fund the Housing Rights Service to do work. They have advisors in the prisons, working with prisoners who are in for a short term or long-term prisoners moving out, in order that they don't go out onto the streets, that there's sustainable housing solution, be it a temporary and a permanent. And there's a pathway in there for them with the appropriate support. Secondly, one of the actions within the Ministerial Action Plan, there was issues with release from police custody, in particular of vulnerable people being policed. We've met with senior management in PSNI. There's a seminar being arranged for the week after next with all the relevant sectoral stakeholders to look at. There is a procedure where vulnerable people, police tell us, aren't released onto the streets or from police custody, and to inform and educate the sector as to what that is and debate any gaps that there might be. So there's definite movement, positive movement on both of those issues. With women homeless, particularly in Belfast, I can say one of the outcomes of the Ministerial Action Plan is there has been a specialist unit now established within Centenary House for crisis accommodation for women, and Skate's already in operation with Welcome Centre, and that number will increase. There's physical works ongoing in Centenary House at the minute. It'll increase from 12 to 21 beds by the end of August this year. There are a number of homeless facilities in the city that will, some will take both gender, some are women specific, such as Regina Jelly, etc. We constantly will measure occupancy, quality of service there, but there is no reason why, to my mind, certainly in Belfast or should be elsewhere, that a homeless woman should not be able to provide with at least temporary accommodation and appropriate support, and with a housing options approach, agree a route through to permanent housing for them.
Can I just say, Chair, before you come on to the other issues, I think another issue to highlight in terms of cross-departmental working is when people come out of, particularly youth justice, young people, come out of youth justice and there's no training available. Because, well, you know, we start our courses in September. We've got a young person who absolutely needs education now.
Can I pick up on the issue of women?
Yes.
As we develop the Housing First model further, we certainly we would see that women would be able to access those services, and certainly a Welcome organisation wouldn't see a further need for female-specific hostels as we move into Housing First. What will maybe the difference between the genders will be that the vulnerabilities of women are very different from men, and so therefore, in terms of addressing the issues that women present with, it may the support package may look somewhat different. Women that we work with have present with lots of psychological issues associated with feeling that they have, particularly if they have children, that they've failed their children, that they've failed as a woman. So they present with different issues which manifest themselves in different ways. But I do think as we get into Housing First, that we should be able to provide for those females presenting without having to move down the road providing female-specific hostels or temporary accommodation units.
Could I just add a couple of caveats
Yes.
about criminal justice? And I know the Housing Executive support excellent services, and those services are meant to intervene at the point of people leaving. But there are still really difficult structural issues. I was at a conference yesterday when a member of staff from NIACRO was talking about one of the difficulties they were facing, and that was about the fact that the exit grant that you get from leaving prison for those who are without any fixed abode or who are homeless has been halved. And also, they come out, so people are coming out with less money, and our organisation has tried to approach this with prison sector, but also now, it used to be you would come out and you would have enough money that would get you through your first week's rent. You are now having to wait so many days before you even get your housing benefit. So it is becoming increasingly difficult for people to access accommodation in the community. And if they can't access accommodation in the community, you can't then build in community-based supports. And those are very structural things. And I think there still continues, and Kerry and Sandra can perhaps contradict me, but I think there are still some issues in regard to the health service that people receive within prison and the link up to health in the community in regard to medication, particularly those medications like antipsychotic medications and whatever, where someone might come out with 2 days' supply. Whatever placement they're in breaks down. They have a psychotic break. There's no way. There are real difficulties, and people end up in prison again. And I think that those are things that, if we did have those are things that are easily dealt with, and shouldn't have a great cost associated to them, and really to do with information sharing. But there still are some issues around leaving prison. Sorry, Kerry.
Just in relation to health, firstly, just to be really clear around other services, I don't believe we need more hostel accommodation.
Yeah.
I don't. I believe we need more housing, and I think housing is the way forward. I think hostel accommodation should not be our aspiration for people. Yeah. I think housing with support should be our aspiration for all client groups. In relation to health, just following on from the last time we were at the committee, we invited some of health colleagues from the Department of Health to visit Stella Maris. And they took up that offer, and we talked to them about would they be prepared to accept a paper in relation to what we could do differently, what they could do differently, and if we had a wish list of service provision around health, would they accept something in relation to that. So I've been linking with Ricky, and there's research going on at the moment through the Council for the Homeless where we'll be able to drill down specifically to issues in relation to different parts of Northern Ireland and present that as well. But I think if I look at our experience in Dublin of provision of services, they're jointly commissioned by the local authority and the health service executive. That allows us to provide care and support to people, not simply support through the Supporting People programme, for which we're very grateful. The Supporting People programme, I don't want to knock that, but I definitely think that we should, there are examples, and Scotland's another great example, where there are legislative commitments around the funding from health as well into homeless services, and that would be something that we would very much welcome in this administration to look at that, yes.
Okay. Just in terms of the legislative requirement for cooperation, just to get the sector's view on that for cross-departmental working, and just, was I right in trying to summarise the two asks?
Yes. And we do have, as you know, within the Housing Amendment Order, a duty placed upon other departments to take cognizance of the homelessness strategy and out working at their strategies, etc. But there's no actual mandate that they actually have to do anything and put their money where their mouths are. Whereas in Scotland, there actually is a legislative requirement where there will be jointly commissioned schemes, and that health does have a duty to provide services and actually have health and homelessness strategies within each local authority.
It's important to say that there is some jointly commissioned services, particularly in relation to young people. We wouldn't want to say that there's no commitment from health. There is, but I think when we're particularly looking at this more difficult and hard to place client group and the ongoing wraparound supports, we do need a...
And we're just talking about strengthening that commitment.
Yes.
Naomi?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. I mean, obviously single males are more likely to be homeless than any other group of people, and we have talked a lot about how mental health can impact upon people, their homelessness, but also homelessness and inadequate accommodation very much directly impacts on people's mental health. One of the things, I suppose, that I would be conscious of as an elected representative are the number of males, either who are single or who have suffered from relationship breakdown, who struggle to qualify for accommodation that meets their needs, particularly in respect to maintaining contact with their children, for example, after relationship breakdown. And the impact that that has on their mental health can be quite dramatic. So I suppose one of the questions that I'm asking is, what consideration do you give? Because very often when you talk about hidden homelessness, a lot of the hidden homelessness that we would be aware of would be young men who don't see the point in presenting as homeless because they don't believe that they will be a priority applicant, and therefore they don't believe that they will be rehoused. So they tend to look either... They end up with hostel accommodation, sleeping with in friends' living rooms and other things to try and manage their homelessness because they're not optimistic about their prospects. So what support is in place for men who find themselves in that position in terms of being able to maintain good family relationships and maintain good mental health while they're seeking for suitable accommodation? Because that deterioration is often quite marked. And I have to say, some of the saddest cases I've seen are people who go from being married with a family, with a job, with a home, and through relationship breakdown go through a whole raft of decline in terms of their mental and physical well-being, and often also substance abuse becomes part of their ongoing management of their own poor mental health.
I would say the housing options approach that is being introduced is the way forward for all client groups, be they single, be they within families, be they elderly coming through the door. The idea is that when they come to one of our housing solutions teams, that a comprehensive interview, and it will take as long as it takes, will take place to understand where they are in life, what their housing needs are, what their support needs are. And it's a perfect example you've given, to understand the contact they have with their children, what their employment prospects are, get the bigger picture as to why they're there, which often is about more than housing, and then agree a plan on the way forward for a housing solution. Now, that plan might be preventive, it might be to stay where they are, it might be it's a social solution, it might be a private rented solution, but the housing advisor will be pulling in the support from wherever it's required, and that be employment support, be it social services support, be it floating support, SP support. So you're coming up with a comprehensive plan that deals not just with the housing, but deals with all the other aspects. And every case is going to be different. But the key here is that first interview, to sit and listen and to get to the bottom of why they're there, and often also to manage the expectations of the individual coming through the door.
I think that one of the things, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, but also I think that when we get the housing options, we as a sector will be hoping that this will be widely publicised, because many people do feel, I will never get a house, they don't know where to go, and they sit in absolute isolated misery. Because we're not telling them that there are options out there. We're not telling them, you know, your only option isn't to stay in lamentable circumstances or have a social house. That's not, you know, and we need to be saying, this is what out here, that there are genuine options, and create genuine options. But once again, for that particular client group, particularly the under 35s, if they're not employment, they are banjaxed, because they are not going to get, not going to get enough housing benefit to pay for any accommodation that could possibly manage for them to have the children. They're going to have a massive case to make to say that they need two-bedroom accommodation because of access rights to those children. And so there are many bigger structural problems for those individuals to meet, and all the frustrations and the despair that goes along with that, and it's how we best
and the impact upon families and children, where children effectively become detached from their parents, not through any choice of the parent, but actually through issues around accommodation. And that, I think, is of genuine concern. I mean, it is something that obviously we raised when this bill was going through Parliament, but it is a real concern in terms of how we address that, because that has ongoing implications for the health and well-being of another generation of people as well.
Okay, can I thank you very much for that comprehensive overview and for answering all our questions so honestly. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so members, if we move to our correspondence, and can I refer you to the memo at page 110 of your meeting packs? In particular, page 112 from the Minister, as you can see, has accepted our invitation to brief us on his priorities at our next meeting on the 30th of June. Can I also draw...
Sorry, Chair, just before we move on from the presentation, a suggestion was made that we contact Committee for Health and the Committee for Justice, if they take, at least, I think maybe we could suggest they write to their department to see what joint working is being done in terms of tackling homelessness, particularly given some of the issues raised.
Well, what are members' views? I mean, I think that's a fair enough request.
I agree with that.
I mean, they did also raise the issue about the membership of that homeless steering group,
yes.
and I think that's something that, you know, we need to look at as a committee. I don't know what the best format of doing that, Kevin.
Sorry, Chair.
The membership of the homeless steering group.
Yes, where there should be really decision makers, the people who are representing various departments who should be the decision makers on it. We can include that in the letter too as well, Chair. The other issue, of course, is that, you know, while looking outward and what departments are responsible, I think you referred to, Chair, in terms of the number of committees who may have input to this. So maybe that's something that the committee will want to follow up on when it gets a response with other committees to see what support that sort of lies there in terms of a joint solution to this. But we can address it in the letter in terms of what joint working is currently ongoing. If members are content with that.
And if we can perhaps suggest even they might consider taking a briefing from some of the organisations we've just heard from, that would obviously be their call.
Yeah, you know, that they are keen to present to other committees which have a responsibility in effectively tackling the issue of homelessness.
Sure, and I think we're probably running along with that. I think you're coming into a period now where there needs to be, or there's proposed a new strategy on homelessness. The other one I think has run out. And I think what we need to do is that people like that who were near enough left off the homeless strategy group the last time around, we need to be ensuring that all the issues that face homeless people, and there are many complex issues for people, are included for the way forward, including health.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yes, so just reverting back to the correspondence that is before us in our packs, you'll also see, well, basically if I draw your attention to a number of items in the legacy reports, they're at pages 113, 116, 118 and 123 of your packs. Are members content to note and return to these updates at the committee strategic planning day?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, also just to draw your attention to the invitation at page 128 to both the Chair and Deputy Chair to meet with the Chief Executive of the Commissioner for Older People. Obviously neither the Chair or Deputy Chair is present, but can I suggest that we bring this letter to their attention, but just being mindful that there are many benefits to meeting with stakeholders after we have a greater strategic priorities when we're away in September.
Yep.
Great, yeah.
Okay. And then just to ask members, are you all content to action the correspondence as is outlined in the correspondence memo?
Agreed.
Yep, agreed.
Okay, and then to our draft forward work programme at page 144 of your meeting packs. Just are members content with the draft forward work programme?
I think, Chair, maybe just to say that we'll be working with the department to try to populate the first few weeks in September. But we'll bring something back to the committee next week, so there's a little bit more content there.
Okay, and then just to seek agreement from members that we begin at the earlier time of 9:45 next week, so that we can finish on time to attend the Simon community event in Parliament Buildings. So I'll just ask members if there's any other business you may wish to raise. Okay, so the date and time of our next meeting, it's next Thursday the 30th at 9:45 here in room 29 in Parliament Buildings.
Sure.
Thank you.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.